Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's 7 p.m. when we call to order the meeting of the Merrimack Planning Board for Tuesday, July 17th, 2018. Let me remind everyone who will address the board to make sure the microphones turn on, sign on to the clipboard that's over here on the end of the counter, and speak clearly in the microphone so folks at home can hear you. By way of announcement, our next meeting is August 7th, 2018 at 7 p.m. in this room, Matthew Thornton Room. Let me appoint Nelson into a voting position for Lynn's position. We have 4 members, and so although that's the bare minimum, it is a quorum, and we can conduct business. With that, the first item on our agenda, or the second item, is our Planning and Zoning Administrator's report. Tim, do you have anything for us today?
The only thing I have for you tonight is 2 projects which need a regional impact determination. That is the 2 projects on the agenda tonight for Neighbor Works of Southern New Hampshire and Merrimack Stone Industries. Staff recommendation is that both projects are not of regional impact.
Okay. Is any...
Chairman, I'll make a motion that supports that recommendation from the Community Development Director that neither of these projects are of regional impact.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion? Second by Nelson. Discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 4-0-0 to uphold the staff's recommendation that neither are of regional impact. Tim, if there's nothing else, I'll see if the board has any questions of you.
I have nothing else this evening.
None?
Not until later, anyway.
And here comes later. Item 3 is a workshop discussion with NRPC regarding the Route 3 bicycle pedestrian plan. Tim, is there anything to hear before we introduce that?
No, in your packet, there's a brief cover memo by me, as well as some information that Matt Wakins from NRPC has provided. He's also here this evening to give an overview of where we are with Phase 2 of the project. Just hit... there you go.
Good to see you, Matt.
Hello, Mr. Chairman.
Don't forget,
I
I know that we've...
blank on that. I didn't actually have the... Okay, it's the screen.
Don't forget to introduce yourself with your full credential and title for the folks at home to know. And
Make sure your mic is on.
there he goes. The TV in the back came on.
It's under slide. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Board. Can you check to make sure your mic is on?
Yeah,
Just hit
touch the button on the
again.
front.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Much
I'm
better.
Matt Wakins. I'm a planner with the Nashua Regional Planning Commission. The reason I'm here is to give an update or a progress report on the DW Highway Bike Ped Corridor Plan. And I think Tim did direct you to your packet, but in there is what started out as kind of just an outline of the plan, kind of morphed into the beginning of a draft, but it's very preliminary. There's also a project schedule, and I think there's a 11 by 17 of the corridor map that we previously produced. So I don't want to take too much of your time. What I want to do, there's tonight's agenda. What I want to do is talk about the project purpose and scope, the outline of the corridor plan, project schedule, and we're looking for planning board feedback. So, you know, and anywhere along the line here, just chime in if you want to ask or provide some feedback. So project purpose, kind of as a reminder, this is to develop a bike ped plan for a DW highway corridor in Merrimack. We're going to build on previous efforts they'll talk about in a moment, and real importantly, we're going to, part of the reason for doing this corridor plan is to respond to a New Hampshire DOT request for a comprehensive town-endorsed corridor sidewalk plan. The project has 2 scopes. Phase 1 is complete, and that was to map existing bike ped infrastructure in the corridor. I'll talk about that in a second, just to kind of remind us, what we talked about in December. Then Phase 2 is to actually develop a planning, go through a planning process and come up with a plan document. So Phase 1 is kind of a reminder, was to, basically the process was our GIS department developed a base map using, existing data layers that we already had. We took that base map and we went out in the corridor. We basically drove and walked the entire corridor just to verify that information that we had. And through that, we went ahead and identified gaps in both, mostly the sidewalk infrastructure. And using that information, we developed a level of bicycle and pedestrian traffic stress, which is basically a way of taking the attributes of the roadway and calculating a measure of how comfortable it is to walk or bike along the corridor. So we did that. And I think you're going to recall we brought that information in a draft map to this board in December last year. Got some feedback from you and incorporated that into a final map. And that's it on that poster over there. I'll leave that overnight, maybe pick it up tomorrow. I also, if a little later, if we want to look at that map up on the screen, we can do that. I have that, and if we want to do that now or a little bit later, we can do that. But I just wanted to remind you of, kind of refresh your memory about that phase one. So phase two is to actually develop a planning document. And what we're going to do, and I'll expand on these just a little bit, but what we want to do is review existing plans because there are several existing already that have been developed previously. We did some additional data development. There's a public involvement process. We're going to end up summarizing key issues and then come up with recommendations, action steps, and an implementation kind of process. So just expanding on that previous slide regarding reviewing existing plans and documents, and if it's helpful, you can follow along in that outline, that document. Some of this is kind of fleshed out a little bit. But there are existing documents previously developed, the Town Center Pedestrian and Trail Master Plan. There ended up being 9 recommendations for paths or sidewalks in that plan. And I think you're going to recall that included, I think it was east of the Turnpike and from Rite Aid Plaza all the way to Front Street. In any event, there were 9 recommendations in there, and 6 of them happened to be along the corridor. So we want to consider them in this planning process. The Town of Merrimack Master Plan refers to bike ped planning. I think in that 3rd paragraph down in the introduction, you can see the master plan recommends developing a town-wide pedestrian and bike plan that considers design and location standards so that incremental sidewalk construction projects can be integrated into a single uniform network. So it's referenced in your master plan that was updated pretty recently. The Mastrocola Safe Routes to School Travel Plan identified pedestrian and bike connections from kind of the middle school and elementary school over to DW. So we're considering that. And then again, in 2013, New Hampshire DOT met with town officials to talk about sidewalks along the corridor, and as I understand it, they're certainly in favor of sidewalks, but they wanted to see them come from a comprehensive corridor sidewalk plan. So that's one of the main reasons we're doing this, is to respond to that request. So kind of the second part of developing this plan is data development, and really what that means is taking the information that we develop for the corridor map and just further kind of expanding on that. Again, kind of refining where the gaps are in the infrastructure and basically explaining in the document what pedestrian level of stress is and bicycle level of stress, just kind of explaining all that and making it make sense. As far as public input, one component of that is meetings. There are a number of different meetings we're doing. Again, we met with this board in December and tonight, and then in the future, I think in September, we want to come back with a fairly solid draft of the plan for your review, again, gather feedback at that point, and then in November, provide a final draft of the plan for you to sign off on. NRPC has been meeting with Nelson pretty regularly. He's, as you know, kind of the liaison between the board and NRPC, so he's been helping keep me on track with this and providing really valuable information, of course. NRPC has also met with community development a couple times, and I'm sure that's going to happen again, just to coordinate and make sure we're, doing what seems to make sense for Merrimack. And then really important, again, is we will be meeting with community development, Merrimack DPW, and New Hampshire DOT, hopefully in August, to talk about some specifics and kind of make sure that whatever we end up recommending for projects makes sense to New Hampshire DOT. So I hope that makes sense so far. So another avenue for public input was voter surveys. I think you'll recall back in December, this board thought that it would be a good idea to just get out there and get some feedback, and what you decided was to put together some surveys which were implemented at the April 10th townwide elections. 3,010 voters voted that day. There were 239 people that decided to take this voluntary survey. Kind of to sum it up, 195 of those respondents believe that sidewalks and/or bike lanes should be constructed along DW. 23 voters said they should not, and 21 did not respond to that question. And the other question was just a way to kind of rank some of these kind of segments along the corridor. Voters were asked to choose up to 3 of these segments. And so the highest ranking segment was basically to complete the sidewalk network between Town Hall out to DW, and then up the west side of the corridor, past the library, past Wire Road intersection, over the Babusick Brook Bridge to the post office. They thought that was the most popular for this sample of voters. Second most popular was basically the other side of the corridor, from the intersection at Babusick Lake Road, up the east side of the corridor, all the way to again, over the Babusick Brook Bridge and to Merrimack Commons tractor supply area. And again, this was about completing the sidewalk network along that part of the corridor. Third ranking was Watson Park to Twin Bridge Park, and that was at the east side of the corridor. And I know that that segment also includes part of that Town Hall to Merrimack Commons, but I think the idea was, do you want to go ahead and just go all in on a longer segment than, say, the shorter segment between
there's
the
some
intersection?
overlap between them.
Yeah, so a bigger kind of segment. Fourth rank was Reed's Ferry Village to the post office, closing the gaps in that sidewalk system. Watson Park to Rite Aid Plaza, both sides of DW in the Reed's Ferry Village area, and then the seventh rank, we're connecting the Merrimack hotels to Greeley Street. So that's kind of the unscientific survey that was taken, but it's certainly a way to get some input. So I don't know if there are any questions on that. So just kind of preliminary, some key issues that are probably pretty obvious. There are discontinuous sidewalks along the corridor. They limit walkability. As far as biking goes, there are narrow shoulders in some areas. That limits bikeability. I actually think the corridor could be fairly bikeable if you could just move that white fog line in, thereby increasing the shoulder and narrowing down the travel lanes, which tends to slow traffic down. There are crosswalks needed in some areas. They're all indicated on the map. Also, high speeds limit, they discourage biking and walking. A lot of that corridor is actually 30 miles per hour, which is a fairly reasonable speed. And I am curious if there are other issues that anybody else here or behind me can think of. I'm sure we'll think of more, but those are some of the basic issues that are pretty obvious. We did come up with these preliminary recommendations, very preliminary, and they're based on our mapping effort and on voter surveys. And so, that first group of bullets there is just fill in the gaps in the sidewalk system. Basically, all of those segments that I just referred to. And also, I know you don't want to fall off the radar, the Woodbury Street sidewalk. I know that was, kind of on the books to go forward, but that was also identified in the Mastrocola Safe Routes to School project. So I know that's an important connection, into that, kind of back into that neighborhood and the school area. So don't want that to fall off of the radar. And then as far as improving bike conditions, one of the, again, a basic thing we can do is have a consistent shoulder width along the corridor. And there are other pavement treatments that can be applied that will provide more detail with when we go ahead and actually have a draft of this document. So those are some recommendations, food for thought to start thinking about. We'll firm them up and in the future, again, meet with community development, DOT, DPW, and start trying to dial them in a little bit. And then...
maybe a comment, maybe a question. I know that our work with you has been focused specifically on the DW corridor because we've got to make as best use of your resources as possible, and we can't sort of go completely across town. And I think that with respect to dealing with the DOT, that makes sense too, because that's essentially the part of town where they've got some say in what we do, that and 101A. However, there's some support, I think, and I think the surveys showed it, for continuing the sidewalk up to the middle school at Madeline Bennett, up at Boosick Lake. Yeah. And I know that won't be captured in a DW corridor report because of what your focus is. Now, doesn't mean that we can't support sidewalks going that way, and there's not going to be commercial development that way that are going to come to build sidewalks. But I do want to make sure that we have that somehow incorporated into the priorities, so that when there's some grant monies available to apply for certain things, that's one of the things on the checklist that our town could take a look at and think of as a project.
Yeah, absolutely. So we could include that in there. I know it's been, I don't think it's been specifically in other plans. We'll have to double check that, but nonetheless, we can.
It was one of the locations on the survey.
It was on the survey, definitely.
And then just in the newspaper earlier this week was some finalized plans about 101A widening and pedestrian traffic in there. And I know, Tom, you guys, I guess, got a report to the town council about that. I didn't really know a whole lot about that project until I read it in the paper. It seemed like that one had gotten forgotten about and was different than what we had talked about in the past. But there's going to be some sidewalk development out there that's also not in your corridor. And if that happens, that entire project is state. Highway plan, not us. So.
So
along those lines, Mr. Chairman, the Continental Boulevard is also something in the back of our mind. There was recommendations from the people to include something along Continental Boulevard. There's a couple of gaps, and if we could fill them in, we'd have a continuous stretch there.
Continental Boulevard is another one of those potential priorities to figure out. Of course,
the mall.
Yeah.
From the mall to
Maybe
from
we're
the mall
Shaw's
to
side.
Route 3. Another interesting thing, I don't know if any of you noticed it, but this past week, the New Hampshire DOT was working on the sidewalks that are on Greeley Street and those places, and building what they call tip downs at the end of the sidewalk to make them handicapped accessible. They went in and tore up the sidewalk and put those tip downs in on all the intersections there.
I saw him doing that. I was wondering if that wasn't some small part of some bigger project yet to come. But the sidewalks, at least some of them, had some kind of a excuse for a ramp, but they weren't level, they weren't even, and they didn't have that insert that makes it non-skid right there at the end. to be the
It's
full.
not skid, it's to help blind people.
Yeah, it's
So
for
the purpose of those things is
sensitivity, yeah.
so the blind people can feel they're getting, the slope is there.
Indeed.
I did notice that, though.
But yes, it's good.
Yes, thanks.
While you're interrupted, you made a comment about high speeds creating a problem. Did you find high speeds limits along the corridor?
Well,
or-
in, a lot of the corridor is 30 miles per hour, which is not so bad. I think down by BAE, it's
40.
40.
Is
Which
it
then,
40
of
there?
course, people are going 50.
After you cross Greeley Street, it's 40.
And the very,
Going towards Nashville.
South.
and the very northern part of the corridor, as you approach the airport access road, is also 40.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is a
Which are the state portions of the road, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, and 40 miles per hour is pretty much a lethal speed if you get hit and as a pedestrian. So
Wouldn't
and I
argue
think
with that.
people, and I think that's that. And I think people get that, and that's why it's seems unbikeable when speed limits are getting up at that level. So
I agree with that. I think so. Driving on DW Highway from here to the airport access road pretty much every day in both directions. I sort of always tuned into what the other traffic's doing. How fast am I going? Am my speed creeping up? Or other people's? It's hard to keep the speed down to 30 when
It
you've
is.
got a long stretch there with no lights. And boy, I'm in a hurry to get to work. And if I just get past this car, I can get on the highway. And
yeah.
so it doesn't surprise me that even with the speed limits at 30 in some sections and 40 in others, that people are going faster than that.
Yeah, and also the way the road can be sometimes the way it's designed and it contributes to that as well. If it's a long straightaway, if you have wide travel lanes, that contributes to the feeling that you can go fast, and that's pretty true. That's why if you can do some things to mitigate that with pavement markings and
Well, you
such.
could also do it by getting rid of traffic lights, because they are the worst things, because people get hung up by a traffic light and then put their foot down to catch up. I keep advocating, but I know nobody believes me, roundabouts would make
Yeah.
it calms the traffic.
Yeah.
I keep
Except for the-
preaching.
Roundabouts don't really have a good interaction with pedestrians, though. You can't walk around that circle.
you can. There are ways of doing it. We can have a trip to Birmingham, England, and I'll show you how it works.
I'm in. Let's go. Please proceed.
So, kind of towards the end here, that's all of what I just talked about is going to go into basically how this plan will kind of lay out. That's kind of how it's laid out in the outline I gave you. The only other thing I wanted to say was we're going to hopefully have an implementation section that will be robust enough. And I did want to point out that there is as far as funding this stuff, there's TAP, there are all these other programs. But just food for thought. I don't want to freak anybody out, but there is an RSA that allows for the town, through a warrant article, so the town has to do that, to implement at time of motor vehicle registration, you can implement up to a $5 surcharge. And you can do $1, you could do $1.50, $2. But when you think about it, if you could pull that off, and some towns have done that, and then that surcharge goes specifically to a transportation fund. And I think in the warrant article you describe what that fund, what the criteria would be to tap into that fund. So
We do that already.
You already, you don't have,
Not for bicycles, but we do for road structure.
but do you have
road-
the surcharge?
We have a surcharge in our vehicle registration.
Oh, I didn't know that.
For road repairs.
Okay.
It's my understanding that that's dedicated to road repairs. I think this would be separate. There's a
You
separate
can do an
RSA.
additional one, you think?
Oh, I know,
It's a different
I wasn't
RSA.
aware that there,
Is it a different RSA?
I believe
Okay.
it is, Tom. Not 100% sure, but 99% sure. It's dedicated. It talks specifically to sidewalks.
Oh, okay. I thought he said road infrastructure.
Well-
So maybe it's different. That's fine.
Does anybody know what the RSA is, so we could just check?
It is, yeah, I do. It
It's
is.
got it down here, Mr. Chairman.
261.
Yeah, it's 261.
261, 153, Roman numeral 6.
RSA 261, 153, 6.
Not in the planning and zoning book.
All right, well, we will flesh that out, and
Okay.
we can talk about that offline, Tim. I didn't realize that had been implemented in town, so we'll clear that up.
Okay.
In any case, that's that. I did want to go through real quickly the kind of the project schedule. This looks a little different than the one that was in your packet, which had a bunch of X's. I didn't think that looked that good, so I substituted colored squares.
Colored squares.
So everything to the left has pretty much already happened. Everything to the right is in the future. So I think what's important is that if you kind of move down, kind of halfway down, you see meetings. So NRPC will continue to meet with Nelson over the next few months to keep this on track. I said earlier, as far as planning board meetings, we're meeting tonight in July. I said that in September we'd get back here with a kind of a firm draft for your review, and then come back in November after incorporating any of your feedback with a final draft. That key meeting between community development and DPW, us and DOT should actually, I have it in August. Still have to schedule that. And flesh out and get more serious about, developing a list of projects over the next couple months. And again, draft report in September, final report to the planning board in November.
The cost estimates that you have down here on your sheet, is that the cost to build the sidewalks, or?
Right, I did end up, to fit this in, I took that off. That was just, I'd like to have at least some reference in this plan to relative costs of, whatever the projects happen to be. So that's what I'm talking about there.
Okay. That would help us to just understand in general what these things are. I mean, I know that it's a number that ages poorly, so as soon as you develop it, it's had but
I found the statute, by the way.
what you got?
We did.
It is for local officials designated by the town or city for capital reserve fund for municipal transportation improvements, including but not limited to roads, bridges, bicycle, pedestrian facilities, parking, intermodal, electric vehicle charging, public transportation.
All right, so
So
it sounds like
it's all
one-
encompassing.
It
So I
sounds
think
like it's one
that's,
statute, we've got it,
Which-
we're using it, we've just dedicated it to road repairs. It could also be dedicated to other things if the council chose to do so, or is it
through a warrant. It would-
Legislative body, which is.
legislative body?
Yeah, you'd have to, if you already do it, you'd have to, I would imagine you'd have to go to a warrant article to amend it, I think. But I don't know.
Yeah, probably so. Either way, I think that our role in that is to be a cheerleader and let the council make their decisions, because that's their role to do those things.
We can make recommendations, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
we can do it as a part of the capital improvement, presumably, Mr. Chairman.
Mhm.
Certainly have that discussion with them when
Yeah.
they come to us on those kinds of things. Tom, do you happen to know how much of the assessment there is? Is it the full $5 that the statute allows? So there's no room to kind of increase that. You'd be fighting to compete for other things that are already
Yeah,
trying to spend that money. So
yeah.
that's a tougher one.
Right,
Well, neither one of them
Right
is
now, it
easy.
goes directly into road maintenance and repairs. And so it's part of our annual paving budget, which is like $1 million.
yeah.
Thank you for that, Tom.
All right.
Tim, one of the things that I wanted to mention on the map that you have, you guys did a great job of creating some focus areas, and I think you have 7 of them
Mhm.
as you go down the corridor. And I think that's really an excellent way to examine some of these areas and what are the unique issues in each one,
Yeah.
and what are the priorities in each one. And having that kind of a concept come out in the final plan would be pretty useful. One thing that I would offer up for consideration is that same kind of focus area concept is built into the master plan, but there's probably 5 focus areas or 4 focus areas instead of 7. If those were aligned,
Okay.
I think that probably would help us figure out how to tackle them together as we go through regulations and ordinances and things. I think in the master plan, there's the Reed's Ferry, there's north of that, there's from the post office through Watson Park is kind of the town center, and then Watson Park down to the Common Man, and then south of the Common Man. I think those are roughly the designations in the,
Okay.
probably off a little bit, but you'll find them. I don't want them, don't go like redoing your work if the focus areas are too hard to realign, but if we had the same neighborhoods, I think that would help us as we do other changes to ordinances
Okay.
on things.
Yeah, let me add to that, Mr. Chairman, the same remarks apply to the town center plan. You know, we've got some patches in the town center plan that were identified as priority items, and they too overlap with this. So
Yeah.
the same comments that you made, I think, apply to the town center plan.
Yeah.
Good, excellent. I want to take the opportunity to thank you for all of this work. Thank you for what you do, not just on this project, but some of the forums that you guys have hosted, and National Regional Planning Commission has been a great resource for us, and we're really appreciative of the work you do.
We're happy to do it. That's why we're here.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have comments or questions for Tim? Thank you, and tell everyone back at the office we said hello. All right. Our next item on our agenda is Bowers Landing of Merrimack LLC is the applicant and owner. Continued review for consideration of final approval for a site plan to construct 65 detached multifamily residential units in Phase 6 of the Harris Pond Planned Unit Development. The parcel is located off Bowers Landing Drive in the I-1 Industrial and Aquifer Conservation Districts, Tax Map 1D Lot 1-4, and the item is continued from our June 5th, 2018 Planning Board meeting. Tim, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
I'll be right there.
Take your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. In your packet, you'll find a memo from Robert Price outlining where we've gone since the last meeting on June 5th. We did receive peer review comments from Fuss and O'Neill, which have been forwarded to the applicant. He's incorporated those revisions into the plans, as well as, from our review, has done a very nice job of incorporating the feedback received from the planning board at the meeting on June 5th. Application was accepted back on June 5th. And our recommendation tonight, assuming the board is comfortable with where we're at, would be to grant conditional final approval after the presentation.
Thank you, Tim. Please introduce yourself and then take the floor. Tell us where we're at.
All right, good evening. My name is Matt Peterson with Hillside Design Group, here representing the Bowers Landing expansion. As Tim just eloquently put it, we were here last month. I gave a full presentation on the package. We had a few minor comments from staff. We've made those comments. Really, the only one was Nelson's with the sidewalk on the cul-de-sac. That was anything the planning board was looking at. We extended the sidewalk to the end of the cul-de-sac here, and we extended it up into Phase 7 here, which we're coming forward to the next when the next phase comes forward. Other than that, we got comments from CLD and staff and addressed them all, got them back. I think there might be one or two that may be outstanding, but pretty minor. Being first on tonight, I'm going to keep it short and simple and really answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
I do have one other thing that Fire Marshal Manueli has had a chance to look at this. He has not had a chance to finalize his memo, but ultimately the only comment he has here is that they will need hydrants per the regular comments that he typically makes for the projects.
Thank you for
400 feet or something, yeah.
Matt, one of the questions that came up last time, I think Nelson may have asked it, was whether the people who buy into these units will have access to the clubhouses or other amenities that were built in the previous ones.
So what we're doing on these, because we have multiple different kinds of users here, right now, you know, we have the apartments and the existing clubhouse that's behind the Dunkin' Donuts. We will be coming in with some future apartments on the next phase. Those, what we envision is attaching those to that clubhouse there because they're similar uses and that type of stuff. This is all the similar, which would have our clubhouse that's now at this location here. So we have the townhouses and the single families that would all use one clubhouse, reduces the fees, that type of stuff. The owners have gone to meet with them and get it all put together there, but that's what they're moving forward with right now. As I've said in the past, this project here, we also did recreational area up in here because we have all the trails that tie through the water company down in here. So we put some parking spaces here, recreation here, which actually does tie out to a lot of those trails too. So we have a couple different options out there. As you know, we came last time with this piece here. the board members and stuff were working on keeping the cost down on the associations and that stuff, and that's why this one doesn't have pools and stuff like that, because we had worked with the groups at that time there.
Thank you, Matt, for the explanation. Other comments or questions by members of the board?
So let me be sure I understand. When this whole thing was approved, Matt, it was a PUD, a planned unit development, and all of this multifamily housing was going to have amenities that went with it, that was sort of part of the package. And I wanted to be sure that these places were getting the same or similar amenities to the others that had built there sooner. And that was what was behind my question. I'm not sure I understood when you said there's no pool over there.
If you remember, I'm sorry, I'm just pointing it here, because when we did the 50 units on this one here, there's a clubhouse right here at the corner.
Yeah.
It originally was going to be a clubhouse right here for this whole
Yeah.
parcel that was down here, and it was
I
going to
see.
be in the middle of those apartments and stuff. So we moved and we did the 50 and put it here. So these will all be one associations. The apartments will be one association, 2 clubhouses on site. Again, recreation, passive recreation, also with trails. So yes, we have
Yeah.
tried to incorporate the sidewalks in it, the whole 9 yards, that it is
Yeah.
a community and that type of stuff.
Okay.
Could I just, one question? You said 2 associations, so you're going to have, there are going to be 2 different associations, or it's all
There
going to...
currently is. There's one for the apartments that are existing up on Bower, and then there's one.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, there won't be
my
2 for
mind.
this, I'm sorry, right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Other comments or questions? All right, let's take a moment to conduct a public hearing. Is there any members of the public or butters, citizens who wish to weigh in and offer the board any information? Please come forward to the table here. Come on forward. Yep. Let me bring that. You go ahead and sit down there. I'll bring you this quickly.
What happened to the microphone?
You're certainly welcome to both testify at one time, but I didn't mean to suggest that you had to. Come forward to be together.
We know each other. We're friends.
Well, I'm glad of that.
Yeah, I'm glad we don't have one in favor and one opposed, and you guys can have it, just duke it out there at the table. Once you're settled in and you're ready, just make sure the microphone's pointed towards whichever of you will speak first. And the folks at home, we can hear you fine in the room, but the folks at home get nothing when you're not by the microphone. So.
All right. On the proposed sewer pump?
You can't hear you.
Touch the button on the microphone there.
Okay.
On the proposed...
Name,
Yep.
please.
My name is Eric Schott.
Thank you, Eric.
I live at 6 Crown Point, which is in the Blanchard Point condominiums existing. On this proposed sewer pump that is out there for the new development, who owns and maintains that? Does the town have anything to do with that?
We'll get the applicant to answer in a little bit. I'm not sure what the answer is. I would suspect that in a development like this that's not public roads, it's probably privately owned, but I don't know. We'll get the applicant to answer.
Okay. Second question was, some of these homes are being built right near wetlands, right, on the property. Do these new homes, are they going to require flood insurance?
So those questions may have separate answers. With respect to wetlands and the boundaries of those and all that, they're required to map all of those out and provide the appropriate buffer to stay away from the wetlands and those sorts of things. They also, if they were disturbing the wetlands, have to get DES permits for being able to do all of that. And so to the extent your question was asking about whether there's any sort of potential impact on the wetlands, those kinds of things are fairly heavily regulated and checked out. With respect to flood insurance, that all depends on what your elevation is in the 100-year and 500-year floodplain and whether FEMA maps put you in a place where you got to buy insurance. And
None of these are in a flood zone.
none of them.
But not the flood zone. Okay, my last question was, does the planning board take a look at the sight lines? The intersection of Bowers Landing with Manchester Street has fencing and bushes, and it's extremely hard to pull out onto there.
Sure.
And this new parcel includes that area.
We do look at sight lines, but maybe not in exactly the way that you're thinking. So when there's obstructions along the edges of the road, like fences and trees and things like that that are on private property, if that private property isn't part of what's come before us, we can't necessarily tell some third party, some new people want to use this road, you got to move your fence or you got to move your trees. But the applicants are responsible for demonstrating the geometry of the roads as they intend to build them and construct them, have enough of a straightaway in both directions to be able to see. I think it's 250 feet. Depends on what the speed limit is, how far down the road you've got to be able to see. And our consulting engineer, CLD, verifies all of those things are in existence when one of these plans comes forward to make sure that they're complying with all of those. So they do have to comply with sight lines in terms of there being the ability to look down the road a certain number of feet in each direction. It doesn't necessarily include a consideration of what private structures might be close to the road and tree limbs and summertime. And I know that even my own road, I do the same thing, and you creep out there, and pretty soon you're farther than you wish you had to be.
There's fencing and bushes that are owned by the applicant that are probably within 4 or 5 feet of Manchester Street. It's extremely hard to pull out into that intersection. In the winter, it's impossible because you get the snowbanks. So
Let's talk about
we're going to get another 90 or 80 units. So a lot more traffic's going to be coming down that road.
We'll let the applicant get a chance to respond to that once you guys are done with the public testimony.
Okay. And the last thing is the current condominium, Blanchard Point, has 121 units, and with the 50 units, it's full. And the clubhouse is part of that current. So we cannot open that clubhouse to more units or bring in more units to our association without getting 60% of our unit owners to vote to bring them in. So there's no amenities for the new development. It's the Blanchard Point condominium is full. It's done, and that clubhouse is part of that existing.
So we'll have to take a look
Just to
at what
clarify
the regulations are and what the condo documents establish for who has access to those kinds of things. So
Yeah, it's capped at 121. So
Turn the microphone towards you, sir, so we'll have the pleasure of hearing you.
Basically, I think.
Could you
please
give your
introduce
name for
yourself.
the record?
Oh, yes. Dean Hubbard, 1 Jared's Way. I think Eric covered the questions that I had, but I wanted to make one comment about the layout. It looks to me like there's going to be a kind of like a 4-way intersection at the entrance to one of the areas. It's kind of, I think it's Esquire Lane is the existing street, comes in at the same place. Yes, right there. At that point, you have a crossing of 2 streets cross right together. It would seem to me that it might be more certainly pleasing aesthetically and maybe better for traffic flow if the new street entered at a different location, maybe, further towards whichever direction that is, further towards the right on this map. And I would just ask that maybe the developer would consider that.
sure, I'll certainly mention it to the developer. I think that there's some strategy to the way that they've got it laid out in terms of Eric's question about sight lines. If you moved their driveway towards that curve, you might find yourself in a position where that curve prevents you from having that 250 feet.
Well, actually, it seems to me that the site, with the present trees, which, as you can see on the drawing, there are trees very close to that intersection in the new development area. There are no trees whatsoever now into the other side. So by moving the road in the direction that I'm proposing, you would, in fact, improve sight lines. Now, if sight lines don't include trees, I guess that makes no difference. But I don't see how it could hurt sight lines. I mean, the present plan, I don't see where sight lines have been considered for the present plan. Just my my
Thank you
input.
for the comment. We'll get
Yeah,
the applicant
sure.
to get a chance to address it when he comes in. Thank you.
Thank you very
I need
much.
a clarification, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
I'm a little bit lost on which intersection he's talking about. Are you talking about the Augustus Circle intersection?
Yeah,
Yes.
Matt had pointed to that right there.
Okay, all right, I'm back on the page now.
I get a little bit lost too when north is not up on my map or.
Yeah, it's
Sort of up.
kind of mostly up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a lot of thought that goes behind aligning the roadways to how they meet the ones across the street. And if they're not going to meet straight on, then you want them to be a certain distance apart so that they don't turn into each other or have people that aren't expecting the cars to come off of the other road. And there's probably a dozen other factors that I don't relate to or off the top of my head that tends to almost dictate the way the plan has to be laid out in order to work and satisfy all those various requirements. So it's tricky. It's not always easy to make adjustments.
Not the least of which is headlights in somebody's living room window or something if
Yeah.
it's not coming to a T intersection or a cross intersection.
Yeah, that's true. If you have the intersections that don't line up.
Again, if you look at the map, the likelihood of headlights in people's windows is much greater, the way it's laid out, than if you had the new portion moved downward. As you see people coming out from the new portion, headlights are going to tend to be into the existing units, whereas if they move down, they would be into a wooded area.
I understand your perspective. We'll let the applicant take a comment, take a look at it, and see. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Are there other members of the public or abutters who wish to weigh in? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll invite the applicant to come back up and take the table and respond to those things. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, good evening. I'm Matt Peterson again. The homeowners association, as you stated, the pump station would be the responsibility of a homeowners association. It's not going to be the town of Merrimack, so it would be set up that would be one of the things that the homeowners association would have to take care of. Number two, as Chairman stated, the wetlands, we've mapped all the wetlands here this year. We do meet all the setbacks. It has been reviewed by staff. We are not in the 100-year floodplain, so there is no issues on that. As far as site distance goes, in the plan set that we had submitted to you guys, we did look at site distance. Unfortunately, I did not have the answer for the gentleman that just spoke. We looked at site distance at the end of our cul-de-sac, entering Bowers Landing, and we also did a profile at the other entrance, 200 feet, making sure we met. I can definitely check the Manchester site distance and verify that with staff that we're okay at that. We have all the survey out there. It's just a matter of cutting the profiles that we did. CLD didn't ask for it.
It was an existing roadway that was, there was no need for this particular project to do the site distance to that location.
No, I understand. And if it's not one where you're required to do the site distance, I'd still ask you to consult with your client.
If there's something in the way that I heard that should be fixed, that's, we don't want it.
I mean,
Doesn't make sense.
I'm sure nobody intended to put fences or trees or something that's blocking the view from that turn, and it's probably something people can correct if it's out there, if it's a problem out there.
And then the last thing I wanted to state for the board members, everybody knows, and homeowners that just spoke, again, we had met with this group last time, so I was told, heard something different tonight, so I don't want to go back and forth with that. I'm going to leave it to the board that say, I'll build another clubhouse at this point here if we can't combine with the other one. We thought more people would help bring down the fees and everything if they're already full. I've got the room right here. I already did it. I just didn't put a building there because I thought it was overuse because you got to pay for them both.
Yeah.
So, but if we can't work out with staff, the final homeowners associations, that they're allowed to use this one, we would build one right here with the parking that's already there. It's already flat. I laid it all out that way originally anyway, so I guess that's what I'd ask based on the comments over here. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Matt. How about talk a little bit about that intersection of the upper circle?
Goes to Circle.
Oh, across from, so as we come down here, this grade is dropping. We're a lot higher at this point here. Let me go to the grading plan for you. So up at this location here, we're 220, and then we drop down, we're 225 here. That's a miss. 220, no, it goes up. Okay, so it's going up to this point here to 225, and we came down into the site at this point here. I've always been taught to line them up across from each other just because the homeowners will all yell at me, as you said, about the lights going into it. We do have the site distance at this location. I lined up intersections. We're looking at a potential another intersection here for the apartments that we had done some concepts and met with staff way back when. We haven't shown them on this plan because we haven't finalized the buildings and stuff. But gap-wise, I'm starting to run out of room between them that's there. So this made the most amount of sense with future stuff. One here. There's actually another one that we proposed here, and then we one more up here. So where they were all going, they make sense as future plans.
In order to meet the requirement for spacing between driveways as well.
I got you. Any members of the board have further questions for Matt about the comments that were raised by the public or anything else? Back to the memo. Are there any waivers that we're taking up, or we?
There are not.
Okay. So then, board members, it's appropriate to take up whether you would like to take final action on this application, and if so, what that be. So what is the will of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to propose that we give a final approval, conditional final approval for this, subject to, obviously, the various points that Matt just made. Also, the memo dated June 11th, 2018 by Mr. Price, I beg your pardon, and also any of the comments from Mr. Manueli, Fire Chief. They're already in the record. Otherwise, I would make the conditional final approval.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion?
I will second it.
Second by Nelson. Further discussion? If there's none, I'm sorry.
Remarks by Matt included that business with the clubhouse.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
Yes,
in-
yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm okay then.
Any
Yeah,
further
me too.
discussion? Okay. All in favor of granting conditional final approval subject to all the conditions in the memo and those discussed here tonight, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? That is 4-0-0. You're approved.
Good night.
Good night.
God bless.
Thank you for that
He's in a hurry
presentation.
to get out of here, isn't he?
Yes. Next item on our agenda is Peter Olivier and Sherry Olivier as the applicant and Siam 04 Realty as the owner. Review for acceptance and consideration of a waiver of full site plan review to permit employee parking for an off-site landscaping business, as well as employee and tractor-trailer parking for an off-site moving business, both of which are in addition to the existing on-site restaurant use. The parcel is located at 75 Daniel Webster Highway in the I-1 Industrial and Aquifer Conservation Districts, Tax Map 2D, Lot 2B, Lot 28. This item is continued from our June 19th, 2018 meeting. Tim, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your packet, you have a memo from Robert Price dated July 9th with a background on this property. This actually was a result of an enforcement action regarding a complaint regarding the parking of several tractor-trailer trailers on the site. We followed up with the applicant. They've come forward with this site plan application for a mix of uses that includes the restaurant, off-site parking for the neighboring landscape business, as well as tractor-trailer parking for an off-site moving business, all on the same lot. The parking is insufficient based on the regulations. They have requested a waiver of full site plan that would potentially address that. Staff recommends that the board discuss the mix of uses, their compatibility, as well as the completeness of the application and whether or not the waiver of full site plan is appropriate.
All right, is the applicant here? Please come forward. You can set up at the table here. Take a moment to get settled in and sign in on the clipboard, and when you're all set and ready, then tell us about the project. When you're ready to begin, just begin with an introduction of yourself.
My name is Sherry Olivier. I'm the co-applicant, and we submitted some information working with Robert Price and some other staff in regards to the site violation.
Okay.
Sherry's taking care of most of this project. Unfortunately, the owner of the property is unable to attend tonight as he recently lost his wife and has to take care of his child and work the restaurant at the same time. So we're kind of here on his behalf. My name is Eric Brand. I own P&L Landscaping right next door. We've been working with the past 3 owners of the property, having some of our employees in off hours of the restaurant parking next door. It came to our attention that that was a violation back in February, March timeframe. So we've worked together with the trucking company that Sherry's representing to make sure that everything was in compliance. For our business peak hours are definitely off hours of what the restaurant is. Our employees tend to come in at about 6 a.m., between 6 and 7 a.m. Most of them tend to leave between 3 and 3:30 in the afternoon. Occasionally there's a few people that stick around till about 4:30. And then we have some on-site parking for ourselves at our business. But we've grown over the years, and we needed some additional parking, so that's why we've worked with our neighbors in a very nice, friendly manner in order to help everybody out at the same fashion. There's been no major issues or other complaints that I've seen in the last 10 years since I've been a nice neighbor there. I know we've done a lot of great things in the community, worked with a lot of different people. If there's any other concerns or issues, I'd be happy to address them, but none have been brought to my attention until this.
So we had a surveyor come out and redraw the plans, and we worked trying to make almost an addendum to the actual plans, and we had we mapped out, we did lines in the back for parking, measured out the appropriate space for turnaround. The same with the trucking company is that most of the trucks come in and out on off hours. It doesn't really interfere with the parking or day-to-day business with the restaurant.
Okay. So you said that you had a surveyor come and redraw the plans. Do you mean mark up the plans that we have, or is there
That's
a clearer
correct.
set?
Nope.
These are a little bit difficult to find my way around, to figure out where the parking was going to be.
It's extremely difficult.
I'm a little confused about the suggestion or the question about the use being off hours for the restaurant. Is the restaurant open at lunchtime?
Currently, they close at 1:30, so if they are open, they're open a short period of time. As we said, he takes care of his daughter. He's a single parent now.
Yeah.
So the idea is that he will eventually be dinner time or like early afternoon.
Sure. As a restaurant use, though, it certainly has permission to be open at lunchtime if it chooses to be, and at least
Absolutely.
to some degree it is. And so those trucks, if they're parked there during the day, as they appear to be, they're using spaces that aren't going to be available for the restaurant.
During the day, it's not as busy as night, so if you go by on a busy day, where the truck parking is, nobody tends to park there. There's
'cause
enough
there's trucks
parking
there.
on.
Well,
Well, right, but you could still park in front of the trucks if they felt the need. But as normal business day to day is typically enough parking spaces on either side of the restaurant.
Well, could I throw my oar in? I went to the site yesterday at about 12 o'clock. It shows here on the map you produced there are 29 spaces, as you put, for cars. Well, yesterday you would have got the 17 spaces, which I guess most of the people looked like P&L employees, which are fine. But there was no parking behind where those trucks were, and very limited parking in front of them. So, with greatest of respect, I know what your whoever did this work has marked out, but that doesn't reflect what was there on the site. Your trailers were much further back. Some of them were, some of them weren't. So the staggering effect meant that the whole of that central area, there was virtually no car parking availability. Now, I will concur that the time I went, the restaurant, which presumably was operational, there were still 1 or 2 spaces around the restaurant area. But as far as I could see, nowhere does you come anywhere near the sort of spaces that Mr. Price's memo says. Your trucks were parked that badly with the trailers and the loose trucks. You just didn't have the space you claim. Now, I don't know what happens at 7 o'clock, which is probably when the restaurant is busier, and you're saying that the P&L employees, you're not there. But I'm still saying that you don't in any way get near to what the restaurant is supposed to have in parking space, given the number of tables in the restaurant. That's all I can tell you. Your parking was not, according to this drawing, which you've scheduled up, I think Ernst Jeffrey did for you, it just
That's
doesn't
correct.
bear resemblance to what was there
Okay.
yesterday at lunchtime.
So Ernest, when he came out and measured it, it was measured off of exactly where, I know, I'm just gonna explain what he had told me, is it was measured off exactly where they were located off, and then he did say that there was enough to attempt at another parking spaces behind the trailer. If we had to pull them forward and level them off, we could certainly do that. But according to the plan, we didn't park or line off any of the spaces behind the trailer yet because that wasn't originally approved. So we didn't want to go and park somewhere where, you know, you weren't supposed to park as of right now. So it was, you know, a plan in progress. They went out and lined the 17 spaces in the back. I could pull the trailers forward, level them off, and then redo the 12 spaces behind. And I know that there's not lines on some of the other spacing where there's marked on here. We could certainly go out and put some lines down on there. So it's more clear of where the parking spaces will be.
I thought this area was more gravel than pavement. Is it gravel or pavement?
It's from this solid line, it's gravel back.
Okay, so when you say they lined the spaces, what do you mean?
The wooded lines in the back, we did use some marking paint to stripe lines even within the gravel to one, measure off and make sure that the plan was accurate, and to show that if somebody was to go out and take a look at it. According to what Sherry's saying, and being a neighbor there for 10 years, I've seen this quite a bit. The parking area that they're using for the tractor trailers, there's more than ample space, as she's describing, to be able to pull those parking spaces closer to the building. There's even shown on here, there's a lot of space between the actual building and where the tractor trailers are being parked in order to pull that forward and make room for those spaces on the back side.
Those spaces on the back, I mean, if I'm coming to a restaurant, I'm not going behind some trucks to go find a parking space and then going between trucks to walk up to the restaurant at night in the dark. That's
just not happening.
To me, I'm not convinced that these are compatible uses to do a retail restaurant where you've got consumers coming in. I don't know, maybe they've got their family members with them, and at the same time, it's a truck parking lot. The overflow, the employee parking for P&L is probably the most compatible because it's just people with cars, and the cars sit there and they're not in the way. But the trucks, and then on top of that, we've got a moving business, which with a different set of trucks coming and going and using the space. We didn't talk about what time those were there as well, but
That is the tractor and truck parking. They don't operate, the trucks come in and out. That's the only thing that it's used for. So it's not used for day-to-day business. It's not, customers aren't coming to the location. We could certainly go back and rework the plan if you would prefer to see the trucks in the rear and then have some of the parking situated in front of the trucks. So,
well, explain to me first the logic of combining a restaurant and basically a truck storage lot. I mean, how do these two things belong together?
sure. Antonio, the owner of the restaurant, is friends with our family, and we, went there day to day, and we were in search of a new place to park our trucks and trailers. So we confronted him, and he said, sure, we're good friends. We want to, help each other out. So you're free to park back here as long as it doesn't interfere with P&L's parking. And we were able to set it up where they could still park, and we could park our trucks in front of there.
Okay. I certainly understand that it was, there was some prior association or friendship or contacts or family members and things. and that, you know, it was an available space that you could ask and receive permission to use. But what I was getting at is more of how do these two things, a restaurant with consumers coming and going to come in at lunch or at dinner time to bring their kids and their family and park and use it in a parking lot that's got this other purpose, which is much more industrial, much more, I mean, you just don't usually see someone deliberately putting the consumers in a truck parking lot.
Right. Well, if you would look at the, like, abutting properties, there's a lot of tractor-trailer work. It's all industrial, commercial zoned. So it doesn't interfere. It's not like we're going to a high-volume restaurant. It's that you very rarely see anybody go beyond the front parking spaces. Maybe in the time of an event, but it is not where you're seeing people park all around.
But the restaurant operator's got enough tables and chairs inside to need all of that parking. That's where the parking calculation comes from. And although, I mean, I'm sorry to hear that it isn't high volume, but I'm sure the owner wishes it was.
Absolutely.
And if that were to happen, you don't have the number of spaces that you need, and you've also got this interaction with two streams of traffic or customers or clients or whatever that really don't mix very well.
Well, I mean, we don't usually interfere with the customers that are there. It's a one-way enter and a one-way exit. There's plenty of ample space in the back to do a full turnaround. If you're looking at something where you'd like the parking spaces in front of the trailers and we put the trailers on the back row, I can certainly go back to Ernest and have him draw something else up.
Well, if the restaurant's busy with all of its customers and the parking lot's reasonably full, not packed, but reasonably full, and you want to come in and get a trailer out of there,
no,
how do you do that?
If they're having an event where they're busy, then we'll park at what's called, I don't know if they changed the name, but bonbons. If it is busy, then we won't interfere with the traffic. We come in and leave when there's, very low volume. So we're leaving.
But you can't always predict the volume.
No,
and
you
if you
can't
know that
always
you need the
predict
trailer and you go over there and there's a bunch of cars there, how do you get the truck connected to the trailer and the trailer out of the parking lot around all those cars in what's a pretty narrow driveway?
Well, there's plenty of room where he came in and did the calculations on the turnarounds on both the sides. Like I said, it's one-way enter and exit. So it doesn't, it's not a tight space to pull a truck in and out of compared to some of the places we go, like, Boston and Providence, where its parking lots are much tighter. This has plenty of room for two vehicles to go by at the same time.
Other members of the board have comments or questions?
Could I first ask the Community Development Director, has the Fire Marshal had any thoughts on this one?
Let's see if you have anything. He did not have anything specific with this from a fire perspective, no.
He knows best.
So I'd like to better understand, you say you park trucks here. Are they storage? Do you leave them there for a length of time, or they go in and out every day, or?
Not all of them go in and out. Some of them are personal storage and like materials that we use day to day.
What kind of personal storage or just?
We have goods that we store or just various things. Nothing really specific, whatever we have going on at the time.
You're a moving company, though.
Right.
Right. So you.
Packing material? What is this material?
For moving. So packing material, boxes or equipment such as like panel carts and dollies and.
But those are all stored in your trailers.
Right. Yep. No, it's not stored outside.
Okay.
So on a daily basis, maybe you can give me an idea of the timing of you come in and you grab these trailers and take off and do something with them, and they're gone for a couple of days and come back, or?
It really varies. Usually it's one trailer and maybe a straight truck or two that go in and out. But most of the trailers stay put. They can be removed if we have to. But it doesn't usually, there's not a whole lot of movement going on. It's not a busy company. just a family-run business. So we're doing, you know, the straight truck comes out, goes in, maybe sometimes it will load up some materials out of one of the trailers or unload materials into the trailers. But it's not a high-volume location.
So now I'm understanding. Sorry.
Storage.
Go ahead.
No.
No, I'm just totally confused, so
Yeah,
go ahead.
So now I'm understanding that those trailers that I saw yesterday, I think there were 6 of them there. Only one of them is likely to move. The others are static. Is that? Am I understanding you?
No, they all can be moved.
I didn't say they could be. I said, are they routinely
Usually
moving?
3.
Hmm?
There's 3 regular road trailers that we use.
And the rest of the vehicles, well, there was a couple of straight, what I call straight units.
Okay. They would be stationary. For the most part, they would be stationary. There's 2 straight trucks,
Yes.
a tractor trailer, and 3 trailers that are our regular road trailers. We
And
only
then
go
you've
in.
got another unit that's permanently there as storage.
It wouldn't be permanent. It would be temporary storage because it's able to move. And then, I mean, we only go in once or twice a day, so we're not going in and out. It's usually the trucks leave in the morning and the trucks come back at night.
So what are you storing the materials in? One of the straight
One
trucks?
of the trailers
One of the trailers is therefore really a warehouse.
for storage, yes.
Other comments or questions?
I'm totally confused by this plan we've been given, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to figure where these truck spaces are and where the car spaces are. And all I see on my plan is what looks to me like car spaces.
So the trailer parking goes in between this black line and then abuts this line.
Well, I'm on a
Here.
different page than you are there.
Mine doesn't have a black, which black line?
I don't have a black
This one?
line.
The
Okay,
dotted
so-
line, dashed line?
Dash
dotted line.
The dash line.
The
on
dash
on the
line.
first page.
So then it's
Okay.
numbered how many spots.
Look, when I went, if I may look at the other one,
Well,
majority, the trailers were basically in this area, pretty well everything. There was a couple of spaces for cars at this, here and here and here and there, but there was no space to put cars at the back of those, where the trailers were. They
According
were
to
either
the-
too far back or whatever, but they were, there was nothing there. I went round in my car, there was cars all the way here, a few cars, or F-150s or something, but there was no way those 12 spaces could accommodate cars.
Just
Fine.
to give a basic summary from Robert's memo as to what's required for parking versus what's there. According to this, there are 144 seats and 4 employees for the restaurant, which requires 52 spaces. The trucking terminal for the moving company calls for 9 tractor trailers, no office space, and 3 employees, which is a requirement for 9 spaces for trucks plus 3 for passenger vehicles, and then the 17 parking spaces for P&L Landscaping. So in total, your requirement per regulation is 81 spaces, 72 cars and 9 tractor trailers, and based on the plan that's shown, there are only 66 spaces indicated, none of which are currently striped. So that's essentially where we're at now, is a deficit from the required 81 to the 66 that are theoretically shown to be able to be put on the plan per the submission.
Are the tractor trailer spaces that he refers to here, these 9, are they taking up 3 car spaces? Is that the way I read this map, or? I mean, he obviously is incorporating a much larger area.
When they park,
There's
they
no-
go,
there's no one
they
else.
go from there to there. They're taking up double, 2 rows.
3 or 4 spaces
Yes.
each,
If you look,
or more.
it says truck parking, and then there's little numbers. One,
This thing is
2,
really
3,
hard to read.
4, 5, 6,
It's
7, 8.
impossible.
I know. It's very difficult, but there's your 9.
Across that,
You can
in
see
the middle of this thing,
It's right in this.
not at the
area.
edge or,
It's this whole thing in the middle here. That's where the tractor trailer.
but that's not shown on the plan,
Not clearly, no.
not clearly at all.
Well,
I can't even tell where the entrances and exits are on this map.
I have an extraordinarily hard time understanding the traffic flow with the way the spaces are drawn on here, how any kind of vehicles would be able to get around the trucks to access those back parking spaces.
And that makes 29 spaces that are essentially offline out of what was already 16 short.
Or
For the-
something.
Or something. Is there any lighting back there in the back lot
There
for
is a
people?
light
that-
post. Mhm.
Where's
A
the
light
lamp
post?
The light post is in the center. 30.
I didn't see the light
There's
post.
3 light posts above the back line of where the original, where this line comes down right here. There should be 3 light posts.
There are 3 lamp posts along that edge.
Yes.
Are they shown on any plan, or are they part of some past approval for the parking lot, or how did they come to
I
be?
think the X's are the lamp
We
posts.
said when we had originally
What
talked to
exits?
Ernest, they should be on the plan.
Sorry, 1, 2, 3. I think those are the lamp posts.
She's saying it right along this line.
If they're
Interesting.
along that line,
Oh,
the
it's
trucks
those
are
little
flattened.
circles
There's the
with the
cross
plus
line.
line.
I think it's
Have to
the
be
3
on the plan.
circles of the plus sign in.
But I only see one.
But that would be on the edge of his property, lighting up other places as well, and that wouldn't be part of our normal approval.
No.
I only can find 2.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, I think some of the difficulties you're having and the board is having in kind of reading this was pretty much a pre-approved plan.
We know.
So we've kind of, in order to try to keep costs down for all 3 parties involved, without having to go through and do a full site plan review and have a nice, pretty plan that we're all going to look at once, and then it's probably going to go in a drawer and never be looked at again. We were trying to do some modifications to this existing plan. So on the southern side of this plan, there is an arrow there that is showing the traffic flow going over the gravel that circles back around the rear parking, which we were proposing to use for the P&L parking, and then starts to go north and then back west as the arrows are kind of depicting on there. That has always been there, is that pathway from before this was even modified. That has been kind of the flow of traffic that was on here. I believe what Sherry's talking about on here is that from how this plan was set up for those additional 12 spaces, that yes, they are behind the tractor trailers. It hasn't necessarily been set up that way, but this is what was being proposed, and I believe what Sherry's saying is before they went out and wanted to go through and stripe it and put up kind of a head-in fence there or some type of backdrop there for the tractor trailers to back up to. We wanted to kind of make sure that everything was approved here before there was more time and spent on making sure that their parking is actually accurate and to the plan. Because there is plenty of parking from where and room for the trucks to back up and move from where the fronts of those trailers would be to the building, and then it's pretty much a straight shot straight out to the exit to get to Daniel Webster Highway. This was previously, as we all are aware, in the industrial zone, though I know we are looking for that mixed use of having the industrial trucks in there, having the retail establishment on there. As Sherry's talking about having 1 to 2 times a day that they're going in there. And yes, I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that the restaurant owner hopes that he has to fill up the whole parking lot at some point and become very busy. And I believe at that point he's going to be looking at both of us saying, there's no room for us. You guys need to go. You need to find some other alternative. But at this point, with the slowness of his business, where they really are just using the few front parking spots at any point in the day, that's where he was reaching out to us and saying, we think we can all work together here and have some type of friendly agreement that this can all work for us.
Just from a approval standpoint, the only use right now that has any approval here is the restaurant.
Yes.
Anything beyond that currently is part of the ongoing enforcement action.
No, and I thank you, Tim, for that, and thank you for the explanation. I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to, do whatever they can to maximize the use of the property. I'm just not sure that these are the right combination of uses to put together. But even just trying to figure out what the plan says, I see the arrows on the plan that are intended to indicate the direction of traffic, where on the lower part it's going from left to right, and on the upper part it's going from right to left to leave the site. But those arrows that are showing traffic design are drawn right on top of what's supposed to be parking spaces and what appears to be a curbed or landscaped area along the bottom. And I don't see how, if you park a truck where you say the trucks are going to go, you squeeze them in between the parking spaces that are supposed to be there for the cars, which means that you don't even have the number of spaces that you thought you had.
The parking on the north side is actually diagonal.
Yeah, I get it. It's diagonal.
But there's an
We
arrow
did
going right through it.
measure out-
24 feet.
I mean, we did measure out for the proper requirements
Yeah.
to make sure that we, in fact, weren't in any violation of that.
Right, the engineer that had done the review of it did the required measurements, from my understanding,
Yeah.
for this.
So, is anybody taking a look at drainage and what's going on with the rain and where the rainwater flows off of the property?
Yep, we don't have any problems with water flow, stagnant water. We're not in,
I meant like an engineer that had studied it to determine what's really going on with the water flow.
There hasn't been any change in any of the gravel that was already gravel prior to the parking change that we're talking about. So whatever prior approvals were done, I've got to assume that was looked at that point.
May have been, but it could have been 30 years ago under some different regulations.
Where does the pavement end? I can't even tell that.
This is from 1984, so.
right, the pavement ends on the black
On the dotted line.
dotted
On the
line.
black
Hash
dotted
line.
line, that's the edge of pavement?
The dark black dotted line.
Yeah, the dark
Yeah.
that's where the pavement is.
This original plan, when it came in for review, at the kind of north side where near that dashed line, it says existing and new. Way back when this plan was approved, there was existing parking to the west side of that, and this additional parking was added in as when, I believe that 1984, when this was last reviewed at that point. The new parking that we're kind of working within that area is what was added in.
And that's not paved, though.
That is not paved, correct.
But even starting from the 1984 plan, you're talking about some lighting that is there now, which isn't on this plan.
Wasn't built per plan per the.
So that's never been taken a look at to see if that's either sufficient lighting or properly installed to make sure it doesn't overflow onto the neighbor's property and do those kinds of things. And it's there, whether it's complying or not. Actually, it's not, because it was never part of an approved plan. We don't get a chance to take a look at that now to see what's going on with that. The notion of putting customer parking for the restaurant behind the truck parking just doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, I don't think that I would support that even if we had fully engineered plans here. There's a lot of things that I can't see on this plan, and I know you think that we would draw a plan for one time and we'd look at it and put it in a drawer, but from our viewpoint, you would draw an engineered plan and then go build it and build what's on the plan, and that's what it's for. It's not to put in a drawer or save it on file. It's to tell you how to actually construct the site. I can't tell how to construct the site from this, and I can't tell whether it's right or not. And the position that we're in is for the board to take its next step in consideration of this. They have to determine that the application is complete and ready for review, has sufficient information, and part of that is in view of the fact that you're asking for a waiver of full site plan review. If we waive a full site plan review, then anything can be complete. If the board's not really supportive of waiving a full site plan review, then there isn't enough information here about all those other kinds of things to let us make a decision. And I find myself in that second camp where I don't have enough information to really see how this is going to work. I know that I've been skeptical about the combination of consumer and more commercial and more industrial uses. Some of these things could well be compatible, especially I think your employee parking. That makes a lot of sense to me, to have a few extra cars in the back that are using some spaces that aren't being used. The trucks and the moving company thing is really kind of where I'm getting stuck seeing these being compatible, and especially without an engineered plan. Feel free.
When Ernest went out to do the plans, he did talk with Robert or Kelly, I'm not sure who exactly, but they did say it would be okay to draw over these plans versus
For a waiver
go,
of full site plan.
right,
Yeah.
for a waiver. I
But
mean,
that's ultimately the decision the board has to make.
right,
That's-
absolutely, and I understand we're just a small company, just trying to function and roll with it. And I apologize that the violation came. I wasn't aware. I thought it was zoned industrial commercial, so I didn't really give it more thought.
Yeah, no, I
as with the
understand.
normal person. So, I
and-
mean, if there's a better way that you would like us to design this or consider it, absolutely, I'm looking
Sure.
looking at that. But to take on redoing the whole site, it's really out of our it's out of our price range. We wouldn't be able to afford something like that, to have an engineer come in
I
and
think
do
the
whole
key
thing.
consideration the board needs to make before any decision gets made is, are you comfortable with the number of parking spaces for the uses as comprised? That's the first question to me.
It's not only the number, it's also where each function, each part of the three factors, restaurant, P&L, and trucks, park. And I think the answer is we're not happy with the parking spaces, but we're certainly not happy with which bits park where. Now, I understand, and I'm not making a motion, I'm just making a statement as me. I would have thought, given that what you've heard from the members of the board, and the fact that we're having so much difficulty with what you've presented to us, the least you would want to do for us is to come back with the parking area at the back of the restaurant, neatly marked on a piece of paper by a qualified engineer, taking account of the fact we'd like the trailers to be at the rear of the property. Maybe that might meet the requirements of this board. I'm not saying it does. I'm not qualified to speak for my three colleagues. They will tell me whether they agree with it. But the very least I will accept would be a properly drawn out parking area indicating where the trailers are going, where your straight trucks are going, where P&L employees are going, and therefore where people who are going into the restaurant can park. That's my suggestion. It is not a motion.
Okay.
I think I agree somewhat with what Alistair said. I'm not really convinced that these are appropriate uses to share a site, but I would be open-minded if someone wants to show me how it could work. The thing that I'm going to insist on, though, is that the traffic for the restaurant, the number of seats, spaces for the restaurant, have to be distinct from these trucks and not behind them and not driving around them. They need to be proximate to the building for the restaurant and not sort of in kind of a no man's land with this stuff. Does that mean the trucks are all the way to the back or the parking lot gets extended to the back? But in no way do I want to see pedestrian traffic for this restaurant anywhere near your trucks. Okay. So I don't want them parked behind it, next to it, or any of those kinds of things.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Sure.
As I'm kind of listening to everything, I try to solve problems and help try to figure out how can we make all this work. I can understand the concern that I've heard from board members about having the parking behind the tractor trailers for other restaurant patrons. I can totally understand that. If we were to come back with a plan, another revised plan, one that's a little bit more legible, that
could hardly be less.
Understood. That move the tractor trailers back that 12 or 20 feet, whatever that is, that's the length of those parking spaces. And if there happened to be some type of chain or some type of divider that went in front of where the tractor trailers would park, hear my thought for a second. In front of that chain would be those same 12 spaces delineated there, where we could potentially, and I haven't talked about Sherry with this, but potentially limit the hours of when they might be able to pull in and out, of which not to interfere with restaurant operations, having pedestrians, et cetera. I'm just trying to figure out if there's a way that we can go back, talk with an engineer, and come back where the board might be satisfied with that, because I'm thinking out loud for a second that if we were to put all those tractor trailers way to the rear of the property, and then the P&L vehicles would come and park in front, there's not going to be any access for those tractor trailers at any time to really be able to get pulled out of there. So I don't see where else we could necessarily put those tractor trailers, but I'm just trying to find a way that we can mix the use and have it delineated where, nighttime, whatever, those restaurant patrons are not going to the back of that site. Does something in that line?
That's certainly an improvement. I don't know if it's a complete answer. I'd need to see it drawn out so that I could really understand it. Does your site abut this site?
Yes, it does.
Which, to the north or the
north.
south?
To the north.
To the north. I don't know if this is an answer either, but if there is an interconnection so the trucks are not driving past the restaurant or the parking lot almost becomes segregated and the trucks leave through your site and your employees come and go through your site.
On the north side, there's a drainage swale that goes pretty far down. Actually, I didn't even think about this also. As we're using our neighbor's parking lot, would it be acceptable on the reverse side, on their busy hours when we're closed, for our parking spaces to be counted towards the restaurant parking that are up front?
When they're correctly configured, we have allowed cross easements for parking to satisfy those requirements. But it needs to be a situation where a customer for the restaurant would be alerted to that, and that it would be
Proper
a
signage.
proper sidewalk between the two, or whatever the pathway is, and that kind of thing. So it's clear to people that it's available to use, and it isn't just an excuse on paper to say, oh, we're going to count these 10 spaces over here, even though they really don't exist.
Nobody can get to them, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
nobody can get
There
to
is a
them
city
using it.
sidewalk right there that goes between the two properties right along Daniel Webster Highway. That's pretty much how, during the winter time, how our employees will go through to go site to site.
So you don't have a direct connection between your site and this site, except for that sidewalk up on the street?
There is a sidewalk, and there's been a
walk
dirt
through
path
the woods.
that's kind of been, not through the woods. I actually stopped my employees from going down through the woods, down through that easement. I didn't want anybody to get hurt. Neither would I want any
Makes
restaurant
sense.
patrons to go through there and risk any liability issues with that. Through my parking lot, through some of the landscaping that we've done, we do have a pathway that leads in that direction. That's a paver pathway, and that kind of ends at the property line. And then it's just been a dirt path that's been kind of migrated through his lawn, basically.
Just to clarify, they aren't actually direct abutters. This easement they're talking is actually part of a separate parcel that's in between the two of
Oh,
them.
that's right. That is part of Bill Nashua Corp. That's right. I forgot about that.
Oh, is it?
It's not even their land.
All right, so yeah, can you do the interconnection?
Scratch that out.
I think the other, even if there were pedestrians connecting up by DW Highway, what's going on your site has to be looked at to make sure you're not putting pedestrians with your landscaping equipment and landscaping trailers and whatever you've got going on that's, your business. And so if you've got an area of parking that is just, patrons, or would be.
Yeah, behind his building up front.
Yeah. This is a tough puzzle to figure out, and I get what you're trying to do. It's just sometimes you look at two things, and it's not our role as a planning board to say, what's in the restaurant's best interest. But frankly, your customers are going to get chased away by this. Your customers for that restaurant are going to look at this and say, nah, I don't think so. I'm going to go a place where there's a little bit better parking and there's no trucks around, there's no traffic around, and all of that. And that's one of the reasons why we look at it as a planning board and say, does it make sense to put these two things together?
So, in talking with the owner, is we are considering buying the property in a few years. That's kind of why we continued, instead of just moving,
Yep.
Investing in it a little bit, and going forward, obviously we wouldn't hold the restaurant part of it. So I understand, where your thoughts are of the confusion,
Yeah.
But we are hoping to purchase.
That's an absolutely doable solution from our standpoint. If the restaurant use went away and you wanted to make this site the parking for these businesses, I think that could be easily accomplished. I mean, you'd have to do some better plan for it,
Right.
but
And
I think the McDonald's across the
I don't
way
necessarily
was
think he's ready now.
converted exactly
He's
that way.
looking at 2 years from now. That's what, kind of our talks have gone back and forth. So my problem is I'm looking for a little help, a little common ground. I want to make this work, because if I do move out and I have to find somewhere else to park the trucks, then obviously I don't have any vested interest of buying the property. So I'm trying to find a way to make it work. So we can, if we can get a continuance and look at different possibilities, and I meet with Robert Price and the other people in the office and kind of work on what you guys would like to see. We can brainstorm, because obviously I don't want to come back in here and waste any of your valuable time with a plan that is not going to
We're
work.
here to serve. Don't worry about our time. We'll be
And
okay.
just to say, I don't know how productive that's going to be, because ultimately it's not our decision as staff to determine whether or not these uses are compatible. That's a
Right.
decision that has to be made here.
By the board.
So I don't know that as staff, we're going to be able to provide that guidance that the board's looking for.
So there's a technical and a substantive element to going away and coming back. The technical part is clear drawings where we can understand where things are and things are labeled, and some of the things that are on here before that are part of the old site, you can, white out, get rid of them, cover them up so that they're not clouding up the discussion or the plan. And showing all of the structures that are on site, if there are any, including lighting or any of those kinds of things, so that we've got a clear plan. That's sort of a technical solution. The substantive one is where are you going to put the trucks and where are you going to put the parking, and do you have enough parking, and does it all make sense? And I have no doubt that you could satisfy the technical requirements either on your own or with an engineer's help. The substantive part is where I'm really skeptical whether you're going to show me something that I look at and say, yeah, this makes sense to me. I like this. I think this will work for the site. It's certainly your option to try, but that's my viewpoint. Is I'm really kind of having a tough time thinking, a nice family restaurant and the combination uses. I don't mind the uses to store trucks and to do the landscaping business. Those are perfectly respectable businesses. They just don't get put into the blender and mixed up with the restaurant, so to speak. I don't know what my colleagues think of that.
Well, I would certainly agree with you, and I guess one of the other concerns I have that I want you to understand, I really believe what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, but there's nothing technically to stop you 6 months from now from walking away completely and turning this over to a different trucking company or a different restaurant or a different something else. And once we accept a set of plans for this kind of use, we're stuck with being able to do those kinds of uses by whoever and whenever might come down in the future. We really don't know. We have no control over it. That's why we want to understand how to make this work independent of any of the individuals that are here in this room, but looking at it in the future as well. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate your considerations. I appreciate your comments and thoughts about moving the trucks into the back of the lot and finding a different way to work it out, making it be at least presentable enough that we can understand. I mean, I see a lot of parking places in here that look like they have lines and arrows and everything else going through them, implying they're not really parking places. And if we're already 8 or 10 short, then we got a real problem. So if you can come back showing something that, that helps. I can't say that that's going to sway, the rest of the board. We might have more people next time you're here, since we're supposed to have 7, but we're just short today. So
Yeah, the current deficit is 15 spaces.
15 spaces, and some of these, I don't know which of these plans to look at, because these dark lines that are drawn on this plan look like they go through half the spaces.
And that's, I think, some of the difficulty I have as staff is it's basically conceptual that these spaces exist because they are not striped on the site today. I understand that the engineer took a look and did the dimensions to make sure they can work, but I still, from this plan, can't put my professional opinion on it to say whether it works or not.
Right. And you can't mark them in the field either, so that's compounds the problem.
So we can mark them with
Well, if
fencing
the applicant, I understand the applicant's problem. If the applicant wants a continuance to try with everything, with her resources, the restaurant's resources, and PLL resources, to bring forward something that A, we could understand easily, and B, makes some sort of sense and addresses the sort of issues you've heard from us, I'd be prepared to let you have a continuance, yes.
Yeah. Procedurally, it's a little different than a continuance. We would be saying that you're not complete yet, and you go a chance to go get it.
You could continue both. You can continue the acceptance and the public hearing if you so choose. You could make no determination on acceptance as long as it's okay with the applicant to allow the board to do that, because by statute, you're required to make the determination because the application has been submitted. But if the applicant is comfortable with that, the board could continue both the acceptance and the hearing.
All right. So what's the best approach for you guys? What helps you out the most? I think procedurally, there's not much difference procedurally between the two. I think either way, you're given the opportunity to come back if you've got something that you think meets the kind of questions and issues that we've had. It's probably better to do a continuance than do a determination that you're not complete and then have you come back because you've also got this compliance hearing or compliance problem.
And fees.
What's that?
And if it was determined to be incomplete, we'd have to start over from a fee perspective as well. It would be a brand-new application. when it
Okay,
came back.
yeah, let's don't do that.
Continuance?
Yeah,
And
continuance
Mr.
makes-
Chairman, I make a motion that we grant a continuance on both the acceptance
How much
and,
time you need?
and anything else.
Yeah,
A month?
At least 30 days if
At
not.
least, yeah.
August 7th and then the 21st will be our August meetings, correct?
But is that enough time to submit plans?
Actu-
I think
yeah.
we would have to do.
Actually, yeah, to make an August 7th date, I don't
Yeah,
think we'll
not
have enough time.
happening.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
September the 4th.
I would suggest September the 4th. That will give a full 30 days to actually meet a submission requirement of being at least a week or so ahead of the meeting.
Okay.
Are we meeting the 4th?
Or is that Labor
Oh,
Day?
it's Labor Day.
That's Labor.
The day after
That's the
Labor
day
Day.
after Labor Day. I believe we're waiting. Let
We
me
usually do.
double check.
Oh, do we?
I believe that only in July and November do we have one meeting. Give me 2 seconds. I will verify that.
Whichever date that we
Oh, you've got-
ultimately
if you've
pick
got
as it
the-
approaches.
in the back.
If you're not ready yet, then we can just continue again.
Yes, we meet on September the 4th.
Thank you.
Its application deadline is August the 14th.
Okay.
The,
So,
the August 14th wouldn't necessarily, as long as we had something about a week or so ahead of the meeting.
All right, August, you've got till
I would suggest,
August
I just want to make sure that we have enough time.
21st.
Yeah, the 21st would be, okay.
so there's a motion by Alistair to continue to September the 4th. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second that, if
Second.
that's acceptable. Can you do the 4th, or do you need to push it back to the next one?
If we can't make that, we would.
You just have to ask for a further
For
extension.
continuance.
You could come and ask, if provided you came in about a week before the meeting and tell us you want a further extension, Robert.
I would hope to have revised information submitted by the 21st of August, which is basically 2 weeks ahead of that meeting date, which
Okay.
gives you a little more than a month to prepare.
So if you don't have your stuff ready to give to the department by August 21st, then what you want to do is ask for
Ask
more
for
time.
another
At that point. And then that'll get dealt with on that agenda. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Any other discussion on the continuance?
Tom was the second?
Yeah.
Tom was the second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 400. So we'll
It's the
see you
only
in about a
notice.
month and a half.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair and board members.
Mr. Chairman, no further notice?
With no further notice to abutters.
Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot that.
Thank you.
Did we have any butters here, just out of curiosity?
We never opened the public hearing.
We never got to accept the application.
Yeah, but you might ask if there's anybody who came, if there are butters who are
Well, the
interested.
abutter is
You
the.
can't have a public hearing if you haven't accepted the application, even if you wanted one.
You could
just find out.
You could just find out, yeah.
Don't let's make it laugh any longer.
Item 6 on our agenda is Patriots Car Wash as the applicant and owner. Review for acceptance and consideration of a waiver of full site plan review to permit an automobile service repair station addition. The parcel is located at 376 Daniel Webster Highway in the C2 Commercial and Aquifer Conservation Districts, tax map 4D3 Lot 2. Tim, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your packet, you'll find a letter, memo from Kelly Chamel regarding this property. This was granted a special exception by the zoning board in March to permit an automobile service and repair use, subject to planning board approval. Again, based on the information that's been submitted, it appears that the applicant is proposing to add 3 service bays, a small office area, including a bathroom. However, it's unclear what the dimensions are of the office space, as none were provided on the plans. It's also unclear what the intended purpose of the garage bays are. The board should be discussing these items with the applicant, as it will affect the parking calculations, provide clarity for the municipal departments making recommendations on this. Excuse me. Even though this is an application for a waiver of full site plan review, there are a significant number of items that are either not provided or unclear in the plans and information. Also of note, the previously approved plan indicated a large amount of stacking spaces that appear to be eliminated as part of this application. It should be noted a minimum of 4 stacking spaces per car wash bay are required by the regulations, and it's not clear if that's provided in this application. So based on the information we have at this point, We're going to recommend, very similar to what you just did with the previous application, that you continue the acceptance and public hearing to at least August 21st to allow the applicant to work with staff to provide the appropriate plans and information for the board to make a proper decision.
Thank you, Tim, for that report, and thank you for coming in. I think that, at least in this case, you've got all uses that are compatible. These belong together. just tell me, you first introduce yourself and then tell me what we got.
Ronnie Gannam from 6 Woodbury Street. I'm proposing to add a 3-bay garage. I have an existing car wash with a 2-bay garage. We got the zoning approval for adding a 3-bay addition, which will consist of a service repair or auto repair facility and a a self-service car wash. The 3rd bay is a self-serve car wash. I used the plans that were previously approved when the car wash was built. I hired an architect that he drew the new plans for the proposed addition. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. In terms of the addition I'm not sure exactly what he referenced in terms of the waiting area and the bathroom addition. Those are existing in the current property. It's not an addition. It's already existing.
Thank you for the presentation. Can you guide me through the plan that you submitted, the one that is, it looks like it's a relatively recent development by your architect. I don't know my way around the plan or how the cars are going to come into the service area or where the bays are going to be. Can you give me some explanation of how this plan's set up?
Are you looking at this plan? Sorry.
Yeah.
That's a lot
Yeah,
of help.
it's pretty small, but yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it.
As you see, so there is the length of the property is around 200 feet. So just to reference the stacking, there is plenty of area to stack cars going into the car wash. We have, one car wash basically. It's only one tunnel, one existing tunnel that will be used, and there's plenty of stacking. I've been there for 2 years. We've never ever had more than 7 cars at a time, which with the existing area it provides for at least 15-20 cars to be stacked to enter the car wash. So there's no problems there. So the plans that you can see is the ones where the arrows are just indicating the entrance and exit of the car wash or of the car wash addition, which is the self-service car wash. Right now, the existing plan or the existing car wash provides for 2 lanes entering the car wash, and we never have had the need to have 2 lanes to enter the car wash. So I changed that to one lane entering the car wash, and then modified the other lane for an exit lane from only the self-service car wash, which honestly should have on average 1 customer every 15 to 20 minutes, if that, for a self-service car wash, because customer washes their cars and it takes time. So it won't be any high traffic area by any means, and there's enough. It's wide enough to take on both entry and exit.
There's a little island between, if you like, I call it the sort of funny-shaped island, which has got your vacuum cleaners or car vacs on.
Correct.
Is that going to stay there, or is that going to disappear?
No, the island is changed to here. So it will be the island will be switched to be adjacent.
No
to
idea what you're pointing to.
That's unacceptable. We've got to see this.
Yeah, I need a plan that actually sort of labels these things and shows the direction of traffic and all of that.
It would be better if that was marked up on a plan where the vacuum stations are, because
It is, sir.
yeah, I understand what you're saying, because I'm a customer. But if my colleagues don't use your facility and they go somewhere else, it makes it a little harder for them.
Well, in all of that, we're not relying on our memory to do the approval. It's got to be on a plan.
We need a proper label plan.
Okay.
I would say we need to know where the entrances to the service doors are, where the car vacuum system's going to be, how cars come in off Daniel Webster Highway, go into your garage for servicing, or go into your car wash. I think we need a decently labeled plan.
We need square footages for all the different uses so we can calculate parking.
Yes, that's the other half of it.
So, as we go through this, I want to sort of list for you the things that we need, because I think that that'll help you to develop a plan that we can understand. I see to the right of your plan, along the right margin, the arrows that are showing traffic flow up the right side of the driveway. And then when they get to the back, I don't know where the cars go to get into the car wash and to get into the garage. I can't tell where the car wash's entrance is. I can see a label that says 10-foot wide garage door, but I was understanding that we're building a 3-bay something or other, and I don't see three bays. I see one garage door. Then I've got the 3 arrows that are pointing down in the picture as exiting what looks like the building that will be the garage. But I don't see any door labeled right there where the arrows came from. So I don't know how the cars get out of your building. Those kinds of, completing all of that traffic flow and show me where the cars are supposed to go, where the doors are, where the 3 bays are, what are the exterior features, including site lighting is going to change because you're going to have different wall packs or light for those things. I don't think that you're adding any impervious surface, so you probably are reasonable in terms of the drainage.
Yeah, we're not. Everything's.
It might be slightly different just because you are losing part of that island there for the exit from what I guess is the self-service bay, where the arrows are located. It looks like it's going through the island on the plan.
It's a paved area. So
it's all paved, though.
All paved.
There's no unpaved surface.
The island is all paved too?
The island's paved as well.
Okay.
The whole thing's paved.
There's a tree shown
There
on
are
it.
trees shown on the original plan, that's why. I was asking.
It withered away. I'm not seeing those trees in. I've been using the facility for more years than I want to tell you, and I don't think there's any trees there.
Well, there's a picture of the trees on the plan.
Yeah, I realize that,
That's all.
Nelson. I'm fully aware
Okay.
of what's...
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that was 1985.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I wasn't here in 1985.
Guess I can't say.
But I think that's your real answer. And maybe if, I don't know if Tim, if you sat down with a member of your team, would they be able to outline exactly what he needs to produce plans that we would find agreeable?
Yes.
And it shouldn't take it's not a lot of work. It's more explaining to everybody what you're trying to do.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. Honestly, again, it looks clear to me, but I understand. I understand where you're
and I
coming
vaguely think it's clear to me because I'm a customer.
I'm not an engineer, so this is the first time I ever tried doing something like this.
So another thing that I would suggest for your plan, on your larger plan, on this one, I think it's the same one you've pointed to, there's labels indicating on here that correspond to your elevation drawings. So the one with the 2, 3, 4, and 5 showing what the elevation views look like. That makes this plan more complicated and cluttered than it would need to be. Take those labels off. They're not adding anything that's helping you with this. We can look at the elevations and figure out what the sides of the building looks like without having the labels on here to correspond to those views. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I'm sitting there staring at this for 10 minutes going, what is this 2, 3, 4, 5 thing? What does this symbol mean? And then
the floor plans are irrelevant to site plan as well.
yeah, for this, since it's not an industrial site plan, we don't even need the elevations from the building. These pictures of what they look like from the sides, we don't need that.
I was more thinking about. Yes, I was thinking more about the page that's labeled A1, which is the second to last sheet. That's the sheet that. Yeah.
What does that show? I never could understand what that was.
The center there is the foundation for the new space.
It's the foundation plan.
That would be something that's more applicable to the building department than it is to the planning board.
It's an architect's plan, basically, building.
It's the foundations.
Yeah,
for the
foundation.
Robert and or Kelly could certainly walk through and
An hour in their office and you'll know all the answers.
If I could ask a question, you
Yes,
have
sir.
the tunnel car wash, and as you're coming into the tunnel to the right of that, what's in that part of the building?
Just 2 garages.
Two, what?
Service base.
Service bays?
Correct.
And you're adding 2 more service bays?
3 more.
3 more to the other side.
Well, one of them's a self-serve car wash, right?
Correct. 1 self-serve and 2 service bays.
Okay, but the service bays are in all cases for repairs, or?
I'll be using the service base as a body shop.
As a what?
A body shop.
They do detailing in them,
I
Mr.
do
Chairman.
detailing.
Currently.
But
Cur-
body shop is different.
Currently, they're doing detailing.
Currently, they do detailing the buildings.
Yes, but
The,
he
the
said-
special exception that was granted would allow them to do auto repair work. That was what the special exception the zoning board granted.
He
allowed
said
for.
body shop, and that's different.
Well, what they've done I think, if I may speak for him, that's where I've had cars detailed in there.
Yeah, understand, but he said he wants to do body work in there.
That's part of the.
That's different than detailing.
Yes, and that's what the special exception was for, which before they came here, he had to go to the zoning board to allow
He's got
auto
the exception
repair
allowed.
use, which is not typically permitted in this
Okay.
district.
No, I agree with all
So-
of that. I think my focus was on the difference between a body shop and a repair shop.
Yes.
Floor
From a zoning
drains,
perspective, I
chemicals,
don't believe
fire
we-
suppression. What's that?
I don't believe from a zoning use standpoint. we make
No,
a
no, no. I
distinction.
would suggest that he's got the wrong use. I'm just
No.
terms of planning board. We're
And
going to
that's-
ask about
yeah.
floor drains and air handlers.
Those are
and
the types of things that
chemicals,
fire and
spill kits.
building are gonna be concerned with.
All
yes.
the air handling and that sort of thing that goes with a body shop. Are you going to do painting in there and,
Yes, sir. At
paint?
some point, yes. After, we need to apply I need to get approval from DES. We need to buy a paint booth and do the filters and everything else, but that's something
Yeah.
we'll handle. I can't paint now. If we get the approval, I can only do body work, and we have to go through the process to get the approvals, to get the paint booth and the sprinkler system and so on and so forth.
So we'll have interest in knowing how you work out all of those details as a part of these plans as well, because once we give you the approval to do it, you're not going to come back before us. So
Correct.
I know that that's something you're looking for in the future, but you got to solve some of those questions now. I can throw something out there that we've heard from a different body shop applicant that helped them greatly in their approval. This is going to sound a little strange. Water-based paint for the cars these days.
That's the only thing that's out there.
It-
As far as I know, I don't think there's
There's still
lead-based paint.
solvent-based paint
There
still
is,
out there,
yeah.
but it will save you a lot of effort with your air handling and your cleanup and your floor drains and your environmental impacts and all of that stuff. If
There's,
you commit
we will
to-
not be adding any floor drains.
No
The only
floor
floor
drains.
drain that will be added is the floor drain for the car wash that will be connected to the existing water oil separator that are already in place at the car wash. So there won't be anything else added per se. The only thing, again, we'll do the body work the same way we're doing the auto detailing. And for paint, we'll have to paint off-site, basically, which a lot of body shops do until they can get an approval down the road for. I honestly can't afford to buy a paint booth and everything else. The cost of a paint booth is over $100,000 right now. So this is something that might be 2, 3, 4 years down the road. I have not I didn't look into it, and the only reason I did the plans myself, because as you know, I went on and I spoke to a few engineers, and just to get the architect's plans for the building department, it was over $8,000. If I wanted to hire a surveyor, it would have been another $12,000 to get a survey to just basically add 3 bays, which I thought it's a little bit. And I'm not changing anything. Drainage is still the same. Everything is still the same. I'm literally adding 3 bays, and it's honestly it's the car wash. It's hard to keep it operational and pay employees and pay taxes and everything else with only the income from the car wash. You have to do something else. And I thought, a body shop will work hand in hand with the auto detail shop that we have in place as it is. And it won't impact traffic, it won't impact, customers. There's plenty of parking on the car wash. There's already approved 16 parking spots. And in the proposed plan, if you see, there's another 11 parking spots that can be added easily. So there's plenty of parking spots for employees and customers.
I agree with your sense that these are compatible uses and they're good synergies, and I support the ability that you have to add a little bit more to your product line to make it a more viable business. That's all absolutely fine with me. I just need a plan that shows where all this stuff's going to be.
I agree with you, and I'm more than happy to sit down with with the board and with.
Okay. With my staff, yep.
So do you need more information from us in order to do that, or are we ready to consider just putting it on the calendar for a future meeting?
If you can put it on the calendar, that would be great. The only thing I request is, if it is possible, at all possible, to put it on the calendar for August 7th instead of August 21st. And the reason is I'm trying to, it's been a long process, and if we can expedite it, that would be greatly appreciated.
I think the August 7th submission deadline is about tomorrow, isn't it?
You just had it open.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I can tell you.
Mr. Chairman,
I
one other
believe.
thing I'd like to bring up.
Okay, I'll pitch in.
August the 7th, July the 17th.
That's today.
That would be today.
So can't get you on that agenda because you would have to submit all of the revised plans earlier today.
4 o'clock this
Now.
afternoon.
Sounds good.
So,
The one after that is August 21. That would give you about 2 weeks from today to get all your information together and get it submitted in order to make that agenda. And of course, if you tried to make it and you didn't, we would just bump you to another one. But if that's the one you
Honestly,
want.
there's only a few things. Like I said,
Yeah.
if I sit with somebody for probably half an hour, I can cover everything because it's
Yeah.
to me at least it's very straightforward. But again, I understand. You haven't seen it on the ground. It's harder to when you're looking at the plan.
Well, in whatever architect or whoever's helping you draw the plans, if you put them in touch with the department. then
Essentially,
we-
if you look through the memo, it's got from Public Works and from my department a list of.
it's got things what's going to be
these
done.
things. Nelson, you wanted to add something to this?
Yes,
discussion?
I think this project is eligible for a sidewalk on Route 3.
Is there one out front of this site already? Do you have sidewalk out
I
front?
don't think so.
No, there isn't a sidewalk in front of it, and then there isn't a sidewalk in front of
I
the.
believe there is in the sidewalk, in the building to the south has
The building to the south,
has a sidewalk.
Union has one that goes into the property.
that's right, yes.
Yeah, but
That's the only one that has a sidewalk.
Yeah.
The new plaza doesn't, and the old plaza
It's
doesn't.
gonna have a sidewalk, isn't it? New plaza?
No,
You guys granted a waiver
Why did you do that?
because you were so happy to see them redevelop the property.
Well, they got a huge parking lot, right?
Well,
So you can go walk up by the building.
As far as the connection, there is a sidewalk that runs along in front of what used to be I guess it's a bank now,
That's the credit union, martial arts.
the credit union.
Yeah.
Okay? So there's a sidewalk there, and it ends at this property, going north. Now, there isn't one at the Skyline.
Oh, I agree that it should be done. Quite happy to support you.
Oh, thank you.
It's a pretty easy one to build too. It's all grass area
It's,
and
yeah,
flat.
it's a
It's
pretty
just-
easy one.
What is
The question I have is, if you're doing a waiver of full site plan review, and in order to get a sidewalk that would meet Public Works standards, it's gonna have to be professionally designed. We're not gonna accept just here's a sidewalk. The Public Works is gonna actually want to see how it's gonna work.
Well, I think it will be easy to do that, I think.
Him?
Hmm?
Is he gonna design the base materials and everything for the sidewalk that we'd be looking
He's
for?
gotta look it up in a book.
I'm sympathetic
Something for the board to
that, but-
consider in August.
Yeah, well, at least go have the discussions and see if there's some solutions that can be worked out on something like this. I certainly don't want to be in a position where we can't waive full site plan review on anything on DW Highway, because doing so means you give away sidewalks.
Yeah.
There's got to be a third choice other than that.
Yes.
But thank you for that suggestion.
Okay.
So the plan is to aim for August 21st. You've got a supply of information for what's needed, and you've also got the access to the department. Is there anything else that you need from us
Oh, thank you, sir, for your time.
on this? Thank you very much for the
Mr. Chairman, I make a
presentation.
motion that we grant the application a continuance to August the 21st at 7 p.m. in this room with no further notice to abutters.
Is there a second?
I'll second
by
that.
Nelson Disco. Any further
It's for both the
discussion?
acceptance and the hearing, correct?
Acceptance and the hearing.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No, I'm not opposed, but I'd like to add that I'm curious on your parking requirements, because they don't show in here, on this current plan, all you have is the 11 additional ones, but I want to understand with your 4 different bays for auto work and detailing and stuff, are you keeping cars over at all, or do people come in and go the next day, the same day, or?
And honestly, most of the time, the ones we keep, we're going to keep inside the bays, because the bays will hold 4 cars. And I have 2 existing bays, so we'll hold 6 cars inside the garage, if not more. So most of the time, that's the ones we will have. If we have an additional couple of cars, they can be parked outside. There's plenty. Again, that's why I proposed the 11 additional parking spots. We'll have a total of 3 to 4 employees, which, again, with 16 existing and 11 additional, I have 20, 25, 26. And honestly, there is also in the back, there's additional parking spots. If need be, they can be added. As it is, I think there's more than enough parking spaces.
So part of what the department is going to be looking for you to do is explain your square footage and your uses, because we have a calculation. It's a very mechanical process to count how many spaces you need. They can't give us a number because they don't understand everything about your plan.
Correct.
When your plan gets more of the meat on the bones, they'll be able to look at it and say, okay, our calculation says you need 22 spaces, you got 27.
Correct.
Everybody's A-okay.
Based on information I got from his staff, I think parking spots were more than sufficient. Based on, again, I'll fix the plans and
could
make
well
sure
be,
everything
just
is
can't tell
correct.
from here.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So, thank you for the presentation. So that was a 4-0-0 vote to continue to August 21,
Thank
and
you.
we'll see you in about a month.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Okay. That brings us to item 7 on our agenda, which is NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire and the Granite YMCA as the applicant and owner. Review for acceptance and consideration of a lot line adjustment and site plan to construct a 45-unit multifamily development. The parcels are located at 315 Daniel Webster Highway in the R4 residential and Aquifer conservation districts and portions of the 100 and 500-year flood hazard areas. Tax map 44, lot 43-1 and 43. Tim, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, in your packet, you'll have a memo from Robert Price regarding this project. As the board probably recalls, this was originally a 57-unit elderly housing development approved on 2 separate occasions for Melton Associates that has since been superseded by this application. They were in front of the zoning board and were granted a variance for the density for this project. The application now calls for 45 units and 5-unit townhouse-style buildings, 9 buildings total. Access being proposed to come from Angelo Drive. The current proposal does not show any access to Island Drive. The proposal consists of a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom units. There's also a lot line adjustment as part of this project in order to allow for a land swap between the neighboring parcel to allow for proper drainage it to be located on site. So because there are 2 separate applications, we'd recommend that when you're making motions regarding the projects, you clearly state that the motions either apply to both applications or that you take separate motions for each of the components of the application. Even though we have not yet received written comments, DPW and Fire have verbally informed staff that they have a couple of issues. DPW is concerned about the grade of Angelo Drive going into the property and the curve into the property with the driveway. And the fire department is concerned about having a secondary access. And actually, they're saying at minimum there must be a second access. They would be willing to have a gated access, though they would prefer it not to be gated. They also prefer that go to go to Island Drive rather than directly to DW Highway as well. We have sent this off to peer review. We do not yet have the peer review comments. Because of that, we'll recommend that the board consider the acceptance of the applications tonight and then continue to August 7th or to a later date in order for the peer review comments to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Please introduce yourself and then tell us where we stand with the project.
Good evening. Kevin Anderson with Meridian Land Services.
And I'm
Thank
Rebecca
you so
Brown
much.
with GPI.
So the purpose of this evening's meeting is to bring the board up to speed to where we're at with the design, to discuss the lot line adjustment, to discuss the one waiver request we have and to go into detail our traffic analysis that Rebecca has performed. As Tim has stated, we've been before the board twice with design review. We've obtained a zoning variance. We are waiting on some comments from staff departments and from CLD. And in light of that, I just give you a brief review of my current design. Basically, what you're looking at, the entire project mitigates stormwater through conveyance catch basins to a large infiltration basin sized to meet the town's requirements and state requirements. We're showing adequate parking throughout the development. We've got pedestrian sidewalks throughout, including all along Daniel Webster Highway. You'll see on the second slide, which these slides have been provided to you, our landscaping plan. It meets the requirements of the town with an emphasis on creating buffers for abutting residents that were spoken out during the design review process. Really, in short, we're meeting all of the town requirements. I'm going to go further depth with the waiver request in a minute, but one thing that's really important to note right now is that during our design phase, we found out that a large portion of stormwater drainage from Daniel Webster, Greeley, Continental, and even some of the on and off ramps of the highway flow down and discharge onto this property.
From Continental, did you say?
Yes. At this location right here, there's a 30-inch pipe that comes out at that location.
Show me that again.
It's right next to Angelo, right here.
Okay.
I have been in communication with DPW, and I've asked and requested that this approval be based on conditionally designing that. It's going to incorporate us working with not only state but local entities to determine the exact extents and, more importantly, ownership of catch basins and culverts. It's our intent to convey that stormwater through a culvert right straight through the development in this red that you see here.
The red one.
And discharge it right to the wetland / water area.
Ooh.
Is that legit?
Yes.
With no treatment?
Yeah.
Yes, actually, that is true. Yeah, that is. That's how the previous Milton Associates project was. It was just bypassing the whole site. It has nothing to do with our development, therefore we don't have to treat it.
It exists, or where does the pipe end now?
It is in horrible disrepair and actually goes under this building here, this building, and discharges right out to this location.
Right.
Yeah, I remember.
The fact that we're going to be impacting it, we're going to replace it with a new pipe, but properly size it. Currently, like I said, it was a 30-inch pipe.
But you don't have to treat it.
It's not their drainage.
Yes. It's the state and town's stormwater. It's not ours.
Yeah.
So this actually is the basis of our lot line adjustment. You can see here the blue dashed line work is the existing lot line. We're doing an equal swap in land. This actually gets us access down to the edge of wet. The lot line today as it exists is up the top of the bank, so we can't even access a proper means of discharging our stormwater.
Yeah.
An equal lot line adjustment will give us the ability to access the wetland area. This also gave us a little bit more wiggle room to maneuver buildings so that we could miss existing sewer easements and locate some drainage features between buildings without hitting some building setbacks. So it was a multi-purpose lot line adjustment. Main purpose was to try to get rid of the stormwater from the state and town roads.
What land are you giving up to get this parcel?
So both properties are owned by the YMCA currently.
Yeah.
We are purchasing this, we as NeighborWorks is purchasing this parcel, so it's a lot line adjustment between the NeighborWorks property and a YMCA property.
But all the properties being acquired by you from the YMCA, you're not giving up any property?
Yeah, they are.
What
So
are you giving up? That's what I was asking.
the upper pink area.
The lower is what they're giving back.
Yes.
Okay.
We're gaining this area, we're
Yes.
giving back this area.
Giving back that area. Okay. That doesn't look so good. Did you have to
So-
give it up?
It's pretty obvious, if that makes sense, but just odd to have it that way in the first place.
Yeah, it is odd to have it that way. So tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about the topography, what's going on that land, because one of the things that's sort of coming off the page at me is you're damn near over getting access to Griffin Street as another potential entrance or exit to your property before you do the transfer. Once you do the transfer, then you are quite a distance from it, but you're not that far from Griffin Street with the flag as it exists now. A little bit of help from the YMCA, and you could solve your second access problem through Griffin Street to Greeley Street.
At the conclusion of the last design review meeting, members of NeighborWorks and myself walked that entire sewer easement line all the way out to Griffin, and it is not friendly terrain. There's an extremely close pinch point to wetlands, and there's a sharp right-hand turn to get into Griffin next to a sewer pump station. Not a friendly access to get to, and an extremely long access to get to Griffin. We felt it was uneconomical and would be a burden to try to improve and do the dredge and fill permits required in order to get that access to Griffin. Not saying it can't be done, but it would have been a tremendous burden.
Sure. It does sort of give you an entrance that gets you to a signalized intersection at Greeley Street, and it also avoids all of these folks on either Island Drive or Angelo Drive who would prefer to see the traffic go somewhere else.
I don't think I can argue with that statement.
But if Island Drive is only the backup entrance for Captain Manueli and his team, that's not quite the problem it was when Melton. I mean, when Melton were doing it, that was considered to be the almost likely to be the primary entrance, which is why, God rest her soul, Rose Arthur made our lives a misery. But I think
that's not necessarily, so it's a partial, the fire department prefers it not be gated, which means it's going to be a access for the patrons as much as it is for the fire department if you don't gate it. And the DPW has some serious questions about the Angelo Drive approach because of the slope. So
yeah, I don't see how you can avoid Island Drive.
Neither one of these
I don't
entrances
either.
is great.
I'm with Tom, yeah.
But I also understand that access on Griffin Street is a very difficult, because of the slopes and the downhill. If you do come down that turn, it's a downhill to go underneath the railroad trestle there, which the town has been struggling with for years to talk about access to a boat ramp down there.
And I'm going to just guess, speaking for the applicant, that if the costs associated with that the density they're proposing would not work financially.
That is a correct statement, Tim. Thank you.
Fairly high density they got approved, so.
And to be quite honest, the idea of traffic coming out of onto Island Drive to get back onto DW Highway, that's a big issue too, because I mean that junction of Island Drive with DW Highway is a bad junction already. I'd hate to think of this being the prime access, which is why everybody before didn't like the Melton way of doing it.
Well, in Angelo Drive, the folks that are over there.
Oh,
are
they don't
looking
like
at
it either.
the
I
same
know.
way.
Yeah, and
But
that's
it's
not a
that
good
different.
access point there either.
No.
That's why the
Chairman.
Greeley Street thing made sense, because then you're putting people at a signalized intersection where they can get right on the highway if they're going to work. They're not on DW Highway potentially, unless they have to be to go north or south to get to work. But
The
I
comment
get the
from
idea that it's expensive.
The comment from the fire department was a second means of emergency access. That's how I understand it to be. It's been verbally explained to me. I haven't gotten it in writing. That's how I extend it to be.
No, I think certainly we don't have it in writing either, but what's been suggested is that they would reluctantly accept a gated one, but they prefer it to be ungated. And if it's ungated, which I think I prefer as well, then that's a public access. I mean, you're really not going to keep people out of it by saying, oh, don't go here. They're going to go right through there. And frankly, I'm not sure that Island Drive isn't a better access than Angelo Drive. Neither one of them is great, but
I agree with you.
Angelo Drive is almost a 10% slope leading right down to where your driveway is, which is what DPW's questions are about. With that
And in the
entrance.
Melton Associates plan, that was adequately regraded to 7%, which can easily be done. My phone conversations with DPW this morning, the request was to have Angelo extend past our development in the Hammerhead turnaround so that snow can be pushed straight forward, backed into our development, and then pull back out Angelo.
Can you do that?
Yes.
If that satisfies
do what?
DPW, that helps.
That helps,
That
yeah.
helps deal with Angelo Drive in terms of what DPW's concerns are. if you have that emergency something out to Island Drive, if the fire department's happy with gated, I could live with it, but I think that it, as a second entrance for the residents, it makes some sense.
I think clarification with the fire department as far as what is required for an emergency access. Are we talking a 12-foot aisle lane? Is gravel suitable, or is this a 24-foot wide paved access? That is not known at this point, and that I have a meeting with John Manueli tomorrow at 11.
We've had different projects with different answers, so
I won't know until I meet with them.
But from memory, Mr. Chairman, when it was Melton, to get onto Island Drive, they had to redo massive drainage pipes. I want to say twin 18-inch drainage pipes had to be put in to support.
Triple 36-inch pipes.
Oh, sorry, I knew I was in the right ballpark. I knew they had to put in a huge amount of drainage to support routine traffic. There's a difference between supporting that and a couple of fire trucks going in.
One of our primary objectives on this development was to push development away from the residential abutters, and that was during our first few discussions at design review. We've successfully moved it quite a bit away from the immediate abutters. I guess it's to the west. The Melton Associates plan had development all the way down to this lower corner, adjacent to the Island Pond access. It made sense to continue it. You had a short distance, economically feasible. We've pulled so far away from it that this is along the same lines as going all the way out to Griffin, as far as the level of costs for improvements.
No question, the triple 36-inch drainage is a huge cost. I'm not sure whether there's a difference between what you would need drainage-wise to make it an emergency road versus a regular access road, because either way, it's got to be in service all the time.
Yeah, it's got to have the capacity regardless.
It's got to have the water capacity, so that's where your pipes come in. Right now, I think it's a choke point on that brook under flood conditions. Certain storm conditions create a backup at that.
I would agree that it's in disrepair. They're actually completely almost filled with silt at this point in time. In a large storm event, that whole section will get probably washed out.
Yeah. So what point does three 36-inch pipes just become a bridge? Just
when the dollar signs dictate it. If it's
Cost.
cheaper to do 3 36 inches, that's the direction we would go.
Do you know how big the pipe we just put under Babusick, under the DW
I believe
highway?
that's a 6-foot diameter.
6-foot diameter?
Yes.
So 336s would be similar?
Most likely, if you're conveying that much water, that sounds like what you'd have there. We'd have a significant increase in the profile of the road, which would increase the amount of fill. Then you'd have a larger dredge and fill permit. You can see how it's snowballing down. There's actually a third option. This is one that I'm going to talk to Captain John Manueli about. We have frontage on Daniel Webster at this location here, and this is why I need to know what his definition of an access road is. If it's an emergency access road that's 12 feet wide, that could fit his description. He has conveyed to me that while he chooses the location and its emergency access, it has to be designed in accordance to DPW. So it's one of those, I have to have a conversation with both DPW and fire in order to determine the best location for a second means of egress. I'd also like to point out to the board that this is a cul-de-sac, and it meets the criteria of a cul-de-sac, which I believe is less than 1,500 feet in the town of Merrimack, which this is. I was looking to have clarification from town, both DPW staff and fire, as to why this requires a second means of egress if it's still classified as a cul-de-sac. These are sprinklered units. There's a 24-foot wide paved essential road that conveys, that's easily, you can pass 2 vehicles. If an emergency vehicle is there, your only pinch point is the point between the cul-de-sac and this loop road. Otherwise, you have a second means out. If there was a fire apparatus here or up here, this is your only pinch point that would require us to have either additional width and pavement. Again, this is part of my discussion I'd like to have.
So if you satisfy the fire department, you convince them of that, persuade them to see things your way. From a planning board standpoint, I'm not driven to have that second entrance, other than because the fire department thinks that it makes sense to do so. If they view things differently, and it may be that there's some geometry in your layout that could be if it isn't right already, it could be tweaked a little bit, and then they'd be happy with it. Whether the other entrance onto DW through the narrow passageway there makes sense as an emergency access also has to answer the question about whether that emergency access is gated access or not. I think that the neighbors that are in both of the houses on the side of that would not want to see ungated access through there. And I'm not sure that it makes a lot of sense to have another
Or the curb cut onto DW Highway.
full access on DW Highway right there.
Yeah.
You know, another road entering DW Highway there.
Yeah.
For all of the turning movements and things that have to be dealt with. But if it's emergency only, that's obviously a different situation.
There may be slope issues there too. I don't have the topography.
I've done a preliminary check on it, and the road slope would be about 4 to 6%. It hasn't been graded, but it actually is pretty gentle. There's about a 3 to 4 foot climb right by Daniel Webster. Otherwise, it's pretty flat.
Yeah.
So it's better than Angelo Drive's
Yeah.
access. So you say Angelo Drive can be fixed to 7%?
Yes, that's what the Melton Associates project was. It was well within the right-of-way of Angelo, did minimal disturbance to Willow, and it can extend onto our property. I'm confident I can make that work.
So you thinking that that's going to be an offsite improvement for you guys to reconfigure what's now a public road?
Yes, I mean, we're going to couple that with the added sidewalk that runs along Angelo. So, I mean, we're going to be working in that area. We're going to be regrading it, so it makes sense to...
And you'll put the hammerhead in for the snow to be pushed into?
Yes, that's the intent, was to basically assist DPW with their issues. I guess they pull down Angelo Drive, and due to its steepness, can't back up. So we could flatten it out and give them a turnaround, and that would assist them with snow removal.
So we kind of jumped in with our discussion and started talking about entrances and exits that were, relatively complicated discussion about some problem solving, and we skipped over a lot of good stuff you got going on, and I don't want to do that. I think that you got a really good development. I like the way your buildings are laid out. I think that your driveways make a lot of sense for the way your patrons are going to approach the place and use it. And I apologize for skipping over the good work that you've got accomplished here just to sort of jump after trying to solve some problems with the entrances. You guys generally have a very, very nice development here that I like. I think it makes a lot of sense. I don't want to miss the chance to say that.
So I guess to back up a little bit, we can go over the improvements to date. I think that's important for us to talk about. A lot of that can be shown here in the landscaping plan, the need to try to buffer and shield some of the abutters. We have abutters that have been vocal throughout this whole process, and we're not here to make it uncomfortable for them. And I think through the shielding, landscaping along abutting property lines, I think we're succeeding in that. Plus, within the development, it's really kind of a nice walkways amongst larger trees, pretty detailed landscaping plans along each of the actual units. It's going to turn into a very nice unit. I'm sure most of these board members, the pictures that we showed of the Londonderry project, this is emulating that exact project right there. So, I mean, you can see the type of outcome that this is going to create. Going a little further, we're touching base on this lot line adjustment. Now, we were talking about this, and then we jumped into access.
Yeah.
The need for the lot line adjustment, I need to convey water all the way down to the edge of wet and water. That's the need for this. That's the main purpose of it. We also use this to allow us to shift units back and forth a little bit to provide equal separation, allow some drainage culverts to get pushed between them. Otherwise, we were bumping into some of the old building setbacks, so it was twofold. It helped us create a more uniform development, but it allowed us to access all of this edge of wet down in this location to properly discharge stormwater.
So tell me more about the discharge. I know that you don't have to treat the water, but what do you have to do to deal with flow rates and so that you don't erode? What does your head wall look like where you dump a 36-inch pipe?
There's a couple of options. There was a drainage basin feature, call it larger riprap with like a plunge pool that we could really dissipate all of the energy that from the stormwater. You just need it on a larger scale for a 30-inch pipe. This might be a 42-inch pipe. We don't know until we interconnect all the way back. I can't really answer that question until I get to that point. I do know I need that whole slope and access to all of it in order to create an adequate stormwater design.
Okay, I understand.
So that's touching base on the lot line adjustment. I don't know if you wanted me to jump into the waiver request now, if you want to talk about these items separate.
Please proceed in whatever order you
Okay,
think is right.
that's fine. So the waiver request is for parking. To meet the town's requirements, I need 154 parking spaces. This plan here, which you board members have, shows 154 parking spaces. This equates to 3.4 spaces per unit. This is based on the 1.25 spaces per bedroom plus 0.5 spaces per unit. This is excessive. NeighborWorks, through their knowledge and current inventory, I believe they have around 600 rental units currently. They feel that the adequate number is 2 spaces per unit and an additional 10 spaces for visitors, or a total of 100. What I'm trying to show on this plan is that I can squeeze all of the parking in, but I'm asking for a waiver because it's not what's needed. If it turns out in 5 or 10 years that we need an additional 10 parking spaces, we know we have places to fit them. Most likely we reconfigure this whole grass island, which we've been trying to keep, and we add parking there. So the basis of it is we're asking to waive the requirement to construct them, knowing that we actually can fit them. You can see there's just parking along the face of each of these buildings with small landscaped islands intermittently dispersed. Our cul-de-sac was basically removed to have a hammerhead turnaround just to get additional parking over there. This really isn't fitting what NeighborWorks stands for, what they're trying to show. I think the plan we've developed does.
Just to clarify, Kevin, the data that NeighborWorks has from their previous projects, existing projects, is that this is a number that's consistently been appropriate for
Correct.
the project.
They have, I don't know if it's the demographics of the people who live there, the number of cars these people have. They have that information in detail.
So remind me of the numbers. Well, how many do you want to build on your cul-de-sac plan, not this?
100 versus 154. So we're asking to waive the construction of 54 parking spaces.
And how many apartment units do you get?
There's 45 units, and it's a mix of 3-bedroom and 2 bedrooms.
Are these rentals or are they?
It's all
condo?
rental.
What?
It's all rental
Oh.
townhouses, I guess, if you would like to call it that classification.
So your approach is, I know it's not exact because 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, but roughly 2 parking spaces per residential unit.
One space per bedroom, probably.
That's kind of the vicinity we're at. I can't recall off the top of my head. Thank you. You can read the plan. I'd have to scroll into it. So there's 105 bedrooms.
So it's close to 1 per bedroom.
Yes.
So
It's pretty close to 2 per unit.
And the reason I specifically asked the question I did of Kevin is that's when you're looking at parking waivers, that's one of the criteria the planning board has directly from the regulations, is that when an applicant has comparable data from projects of their own in other places, that's one of the justifications for granting a parking waiver.
understood. So you're looking to provide 100. If you could provide 105, that would be 1 per bedroom, and that still would be 49 less than the full regulations.
Correct.
Would require.
I'd like to point out that a lot of these 3-bedroom units is like a mom with 2 kids. That's why we're not in that ratio of 1 per bedroom. I'm going to stand by NeighborWorks' facts and their numbers. I think they know what they need. If this board is going to ask me for 5 more spaces, so it's 1 per bedroom, I think I can fit them in. But we're going to still request to construct 100.
I understand. And I also get the idea that not every 3-bedroom unit has 3 cars in it, but you also can have a 1-bedroom unit with a couple in it, and there are 2 cars. Or, the math doesn't always follow with exactly 1 per, and you'll have probably as many with more as less. Plus, you've got to deal with the idea that there's going to be some guests and things. I know that you've got experience with this and in some other developments. And we can take that into account, but we also can apply our own view of things as a planning board in terms of what we're seeing for some of the places around that have 2 bedrooms per, 2 parking spaces per unit, and some of the complaints you hear about, there's no parking, or in the wintertime, people park on the street in the summertime, but they're not allowed to do it in the wintertime, and then there's no place to be, and it creates the...
What's unique about this is NeighborWorks owns all of these units. They're renting all of these units, so if there's an issue with parking, we already know we can create more parking spaces. They're not in the business of not providing parking to their clients or their clients' guests. So I
No,
think
there
if
but
that.
there takes a level of pain before the
before
need for
the-
parking spaces comes forward
Understood.
and first meets your ears, because not everybody's gonna come to you every time they can't find a parking space. But there's a level of frustration that it takes before it lands to you, and then at some point it takes some decision-making and planning on your part to do. Now, I don't think that 5 spaces is the difference between great and it won't work. I mean, it's not that critical, I get it, but, and it's not that big a difference. I did like the idea of it being a nice, even, same number as the bedrooms, 1 per bedroom, kind of allows you, if you have to decide how to allocate spaces, if you've got a 3-bedroom unit, you got 3 spaces. If you've got a 2-bedroom unit, you get 2 spaces. And there, you don't have to sort of say, well, that guy with a 2-bedroom got 3 spaces and I only got 2, and because you end up 5 short when you try to do 1 per bedroom like that. At any rate, I think if whatever the will of the board is in terms of proposing a motion with respect to parking spaces and granting a waiver, I think that you'll get a very, very deep, deep waiver from the full calculation.
Okay. I guess I would ask that the board maybe comments on these items before we move into the traffic analysis, because that's really a whole separate discussion topic.
Sure. Yeah, what's
could
the
do that
status of
too.
what we've done so far? Let's resolve the question of acceptance.
Just to remind you, there are 2 separate applications. You either make a motion to accept both the lot line and the site plan, or 2 separate motions, please.
I think that they're perfectly appropriate to do at the same time if you do. Is there what member of the board?
I'll
willing
make
to
a motion to accept that we haven't, to accept this matter for review.
For both
the site plan and for the lot line adjustment.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining? 4-0-0. Okay, so we've accepted it for review. I want to make sure abutters and the neighbors and things get a chance to weigh in before we kind of give you a decision one way or another on the parking and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And the access. So with that, are there any abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in? Provide the board some feedback? Okay, okay, we'll close the public hearing, and let's have a discussion about the parking.
Could I make a suggestion, Mr. Chairman, given that we have 2 items in first, that we actually vote on final vote on the lot line adjustment?
I think that that's certainly an easy one to tackle, so.
Could I make a motion that we grant the approval of the lot line adjustment as indicated at this meeting?
Subject to whatever conditions the.
Subject,
To the recommended conditions in Robert's memo for the lot line adjustment.
yes, subject to those conditions.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion?
Yeah.
Seconded by Nelson Disco. Any discussion with respect to granting conditional final approval of the lot line adjustment subject to the conditions? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 4-0-0 to deal with the lot line adjustment, and that kind of helps you out for your future drainage situation. Thank you. And now we can treat it as one application for the rest of the day. I think that we've got some pieces left to resolve with figuring out what's going to make the fire department happy, getting some plans for DPW so they can get us the feedback to say that the regrading will work the way that they want it to work. How do you propose that we proceed, or do you want to have us answer some questions about parking and other issues first? Or
I believe that we've got traffic presentation, if you'd like to hear that. That's probably a key component to this as well.
Yeah, although you did ask us to tackle these other questions before we deal with
I
traffic.
guess what my intent was to discuss the parking. Then we can get these off the table, and then we can just open discussion on traffic. And then there'd be probably a more general conversation after that.
So on the plan with the cul-de-sac, the one that's on the board right now, it's board 2. If you built and that's 100 spaces, correct?
Yes.
If you build that and you end up a little bit short, where are your first choices for where they go?
If I build that and the parking is short,
If you build these 100 spaces and then you decide you need more some point in the future.
I would look to add a couple over here at unit 1, I believe. I think I can fit some additional spaces there. I would probably extend the parking past unit 9 at the very end of the cul-de-sac to pick up the remainder of it and extend a tail of pavement at that point.
Okay,
That's
hang
the
on a second.
cleanest thing to do.
Show me where they go by one, because I don't see.
One is over here towards the proposed, I would add them over here. I'd add 2 spaces right there.
He's drawing his mouse up there showing, but
There's already spaces right there.
Yeah, but he's going to come a bit further.
So
towards the red line.
where the curve, where the roads are well.
Starts
right
to
now it's
curve. I would add spaces there. And
Okay.
then the other option would be at the cul-de-sac. I would extend the tail past the cul-de-sac.
You're looking at the wrong picture, Bob. You ought to be looking
Oh.
at the cul-de-sac picture
Well, you can look at
to see where the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I see a couple of spaces by building one where you could add that. I think two, more than a couple, you start to get to the point where the hammerhead has to be further down.
Agreed. I'd extend this and add more pavement, more parking over here.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you were talking about near building 9,
Top here.
and doing a couple more down in that hammerhead, and then by,
If you look behind you, he's got the cursor, I don't know if you can see
I got it here, it's just too small.
So over here, I would extend this to add an additional 2 or 3 spaces, depending upon what was necessary.
All right.
So
What
there
is
goes
that
community
pond
rec
there?
area?
Is that-
This green area?
Yeah.
It's a community area. It's just.
Oh,
Grass.
I thought it was swampland or something, so I was wondering why you were
Guess
gonna
I
park
should
there.
change
but
my line type.
I thought it was a playground.
recreational area.
I can't
So,
read that
wha-
anywhere. but- Okay.
Where is the area down that direction that would need 3 36-inch pipes to convey drainage?
All the
Where's-
way on the right-hand side.
Beyond the edge of this drawing.
Well, look
All
at,
right.
look at your last page, you can see it. Or the
Last
first page.
From tonight or the last page that we had before?
Well,
One
no,
of
that-
2. One of 2.
Just the one we had in our packet.
All right, I got you. Okay, I understand that.
Chairman, if I could interrupt you, I apologize. I have Jennifer with NeighborWorks here with me that would like to speak a little bit more to parking.
Okay.
She knows numbers like Robert does, so I'll give her a minute. Do you want to see her?
Thank you,
Thank you,
Chairman.
Jennifer.
I'm Jennifer Vadney with NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire. Just to follow up on what Kevin was saying, typically we do 2 parking spaces per unit. So I absolutely can appreciate the idea of a parking per bedroom, but really it's whether it's a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, it's 2 spaces per unit. And as Kevin said, it's really accurate. The family sizes, the dynamics, it's typically, one driver and a couple of kids, or if it's 2 drivers, it really works out because we have single people in some of these units as well, so there's only 1 car per that unit, and then we do the 10% extra for the guests. So typically, we have not had any parking issues. It's all rental. It's a lease issue. People, when they sign their leases, they know and understand that it's 2 spaces per unit.
So they're actually assigned 2 spaces?
Correct.
There's assigned space by number.
Correct.
A particular space.
Yep, and
Belongs
certainly
to
like
them.
any neighborhood, any parking, once in a while there's the call that says, geez, this person has an extra car, and we work with the tenants, and I don't think we've ever had an eviction because of too many cars.
Okay. It's an issue I think you guys have to manage, and if you guys
Yeah,
believe that
as long
that's.
as they're managing it, it sounds like it
Yeah.
can be made to work, but just.
I think the cul-de-sac area and some of the areas where people could sort of edge of the road park or edge of the pavement park needs to be managed and controlled. But other than that, if you guys think that the parking works, I don't have any issue with that, or I'll support with the waiver that the board puts forward. How would you manage that? How do you keep people from parking in the cul-de-sac or next to some of the areas, straight road areas where there's nothing delineating a parking space, but there's also nothing that says no parking?
Sure, well, certainly with some signage, we could do it if we needed, but for the most part, the tenants, when they move in, they know where their parking spot is, and they don't park in their neighbor's space, and their neighbor doesn't park in their space. And if we do have somebody who's abusing the parking system, we find out about it, they call management, they call us, and it gets dealt with. It's really not a typical issue.
So I think in terms of your residents doing that, but some guy says a couple of buddies are coming over for the football game or something like that, and I only got 2 spaces, so he's gonna
Sure.
can't have my neighbors. Those are assigned to them.
Yep.
Maybe there's some guest spaces around, but boy, that cul-de-sac's right there, and I'm just gonna pull over and park there. And catch me
I
if you
certainly
can.
can't say that never happens, but it has not been an issue to date. I mean, typically by the time that a call would come in and we'd respond, that they're gone.
And I think day to day, it wouldn't even be an issue if people
Right.
did do that. But when the fire truck comes through and now there's not clearance for them to make that U-turn, now the whole plan kind of goes awry, you see.
For holidays, too. Holidays are an issue.
What's that?
The holidays, you have guest
Holidays.
families come
You
over.
get, everybody's coming for Thanksgiving and whatever.
And,
Yeah.
and in a scenario like that, typically, just like any neighborhood, and on a holiday, certainly there's some flexibility. Some folks are gone visiting their families, and other folks are there. So I don't know that we've ever had an issue.
Well, that's true, but if if they're assigned spaces to another unit, I don't know that I would feel comfortable telling my guests, "Oh, park in John's space. He's away." I can't because I think I can. I mean, I don't know that I have the right to do that
No, you
if I'm
go
the
and-
tenant.
Mr. Chairman, you go and say, can I borrow your parking space for the tonight? Because I know you're going away. Can I use it for my mum and dad over the
Sure,
weekend?
that happens.
It definitely does.
Well, it does happen. Oh.
Maybe in England.
Either
With the
way,
roundabout.
Well, I have a friend who lives in a similar sort of unit in Milford, and that's exactly what happens.
I think that the answer to that question is it's almost the same as we do with the commercial properties, and you don't design the parking lot for Black Friday.
And quite frankly, it's no different than a single-family home. If you've got 14 relatives coming over, they're going to be parked all over the place.
My driveway will hold 14 cars.
Yeah, you're very lucky, sir. Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we grant the requested waiver for 100 parking spaces for this site on the basis that, and I can't remember what the waiver conditions are, but I'll find them in 10 seconds, on the basis that, I don't know, sticking to the rules will not, to the specific circumstances, that the waiver will meet the request of the ordinance, or thereabouts.
Properly carry out the spirit and intent
Thank you.
of the regulation.
There, I've said it now.
Okay, so the motion is to
Could I
grant
also
a waiver
suggest
to
you
allow
add
100
the experience of the...
Based on the experience of the applicant in his other sites.
Because technically on parking waivers, you are supposed to cite one of those, too.
All right,
Yeah.
I've cited that.
Yeah.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion?
And the fact that he's going to manage to this number as testified here tonight. So then I'll second the motion.
Okay, second by Nelson with a little bit of additional criteria
yeah.
to add to it. I have no more discussion to have. Does anyone else like to
Well,
discuss?
So I just want to make a comment that that's critical that we have those additional pieces because we don't want somebody else coming in and say, well, you gave them a waiver. That's not a good enough excuse. And we're trying to make sure that it's clear that this waiver is being conditioned on the fact that you've got experience at your locations. You're in full control of this because you're leasing these properties, not selling them, and things of that nature. So it's all
Yeah, it's all a
self-contained
bundle,
by
it's all a
the
package.
applicant.
Right.
There's a reason why I pushed that be included.
Yeah, I just wanted to amplify that
Thank you.
Yeah,
for the record. Thank you.
thank you.
And this isn't necessarily part of the motion, but it's part of the rest of the consideration of the property. I think regardless of what happens on a holiday or whatever, I think somehow you gotta convey to your tenants that parking out on the public streets is absolutely never gonna be appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't
Whether
think
that's-
anybody will try that.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? And probably they won't. I mean, it's a long walk to get from Angelo Drive in, and there's not really any other place to park, and it's steep slope, but just worth mentioning.
Point taken.
If there's no other discussion on the parking waiver, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining? 4-0-0 for the parking waiver. Yeah, let's hear the traffic presentation. Thank you for doing this. I know that you kind of came in last time and were asking us what we wanted in a traffic study, and I'm glad that you were able to provide us some information on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just again for the record, my name's Rebecca Brown. I'm here from Greenman Peterson. We're located in Wilmington, Massachusetts. We did do a traffic impact and access study for this project. The traffic study focused both on the safety of the study area intersections as well as the traffic operations. And this diagram that you can see up here shows the study area that we looked at for this project. It included the intersection of Angelo Drive with Daniel Webster Highway, as well as the intersection of Daniel Webster Highway with Greeley Street. The first component of it really focused on the safety of the study area intersections. We did a review of the collisions that had occurred at both of the study area intersections from 2013 to 2015, which was the most recent 3-year period. that was available on file from New Hampshire DOT's records. And what we found was that both of the study area intersections had fewer than one collision, or excuse me, had one or fewer collisions per year on average. The intersection of Greeley Street and Daniel Webster Highway had 4 total collisions that had occurred at that intersection over the 3-year period. So a very, very low number, especially in comparison to other signalized intersections throughout the state. We also examined the vehicle speeds along Daniel Webster Highway as they relate to the posted speed. The reason that we looked at that is because we were also measuring sight distances for traffic coming out of Angelo Drive, which is based mainly on the speed of the adjacent roadway. So Daniel Webster Highway is posted today in this area for 30 miles per hour. The 85th percentile speed on that corridor, which is the speed that 85% of the vehicles are traveling at or below, was 40 to 41 miles per hour, depending on the direction that you're traveling. It was a little bit slower coming towards the signal headed southbound. That does take into account the off-peak hours. So obviously during the evening peak in particular, traffic's moving a lot slower because you've got some congestion along Daniel Webster Highway headed northbound, and this is in the area where the 2 lanes merge into one lane. So that is the off-peak time when people are traveling at that speed. Based on those travel speeds, you would require a sight distance exiting Angelo Drive of 335 feet in each direction, and you would require a stopping sight distance, which is for the vehicle who is driving along Daniel Webster Highway and sees the vehicle stopped waiting to make the left-hand turn or the right-hand turn into Angelo Drive, or seeing that vehicle that's turning out, requires a sight distance of 315 feet. We have sight lines of over 400 feet in each direction, so we do meet those. And we also meet the New Hampshire DOT's requirement that they have of 400 feet of all-season safe sight distance. And that is partly due to the wide shoulders that we have out here, as well as the merging of lanes that help to aid in the all-season, which is the snowbanks that you're concerned with. So then we moved on to the traffic operations component of the traffic study. For this, we completed traffic counts at both of the study area intersections. We did those during the weekday morning peak hour, which was from 7 o'clock a.m. to 9 o'clock p.m.
A.m.
Excuse me, yep, a.m. Thank you. And the weekday p.m. peak hour, which was from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And then also on the Saturday midday time period from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., which generally coincides with retail traffic and when people are out and about doing errands. We collected that data on Thursday, May 31st, and Saturday, June 2nd. We did a review of historic traffic counts along Route 3 in this area, and as well as on the Everett Turnpike, and found that in general, traffic counts in May are about 5% lower than a peak month condition, and traffic counts in June are about 0.5% lower than peak month conditions. So we did increase those traffic volumes up to a peak month condition as well. We also grew traffic volumes out to a 2019 opening year, as well as a 2029 10-year design horizon in accordance with DOT procedures. We had used a 0.5% per year growth rate based on the fact that traffic volumes along Route 3 have generally been growing by about 0.4% per year since 2008. And that growth rate was consistent with other studies that have been done for other projects along this corridor. In addition to that growth rate that was applied, we also added traffic from other development projects that are proposed in this area that haven't yet been constructed or not yet opened. That included the 280-unit apartment complex at the former Hilton Hotel, as well as the Merrimack Plaza redevelopment that was mentioned earlier tonight for the Shaw's Plaza, which will contain approximately 82,000 square feet of mixed commercial and restaurant space. and the Overlook Estates project, which was just recently approved for 47 age-restricted units off of East Chamberlain Road. So we added traffic that would be generated from all of those projects into the analysis as well. For the proposed development, we looked at trip rates contained in the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual in the most recent edition to estimate the trips that would be generated by the proposed units on site. This showed that approximately 22 trips would be generated in the weekday morning peak hour, 29 in the weekday evening peak hour, and 32 in the Saturday midday peak hour. And a vehicle trip represents either one vehicle going in or one vehicle coming out. So each person coming in and out generates one trip when they're entering, another trip when they're exiting. So that's approximately 11 vehicles in and out in the morning, and approximately 16 in and out in the Saturday midday. We distributed these trips to the adjacent roadway network using U.S. Census journey to work information on people who are living within the town of Merrimack and where they are working for the weekday morning and evening peak hours. It showed that approximately 35% of the traffic would be headed to and from the north along Daniel Webster Highway, approximately 30% to and from the south on Daniel Webster Highway, and 35% to and from the east on Greeley Street. They would be headed mainly towards the Everett Turnpike and down Continental Boulevard. Based on this distribution, it resulted in traffic increases of approximately 8 to 12 vehicles per hour during those peak hours on any of the adjacent roadways, which is approximately one additional vehicle every 5 to 8 minutes. We did a capacity and queue analysis at each of the two study area intersections using the synchro analysis model, which generally showed that there were favorable operations at both of the study area intersections. At the Route 3 and Greeley Street intersection, all of the movements were operating at what's considered an acceptable level of service, D or better, during all of the time periods that were analyzed, with the exception of the southbound left turn movement into Greeley Street. However, this is an extremely low volume movement. It has less than 10 vehicles during the peak hours that are making that movement. It was operating at a level of service E, which is still considered acceptable for a low volume movement like that. And the volume to capacity ratio was well below 1.0, which indicates that there's more than adequate capacity there to accommodate it. The additional traffic generated by this project was not anticipated to increase delay on any of the movements through the intersection by more than 2 seconds per vehicle, or increase queues by more than one vehicle in any lane. At the Route 3 and Angelo Drive intersection, in the weekday evening peak hour, traffic is anticipated to operate at a level of service F coming out of Angelo Drive. However, we're at approximately a quarter of the capacity of that movement. It's a very low volume movement because in the weekday PM peak hour, the majority of people are coming back home. So there's only a couple of cars that are trying to get out of there, but because of the traffic along Route 3, it is operating at a level of service F. The queue coming out will only be one vehicle long for the majority of the time, so there's more than adequate capacity there to be able to accommodate that traffic. During the other time periods, we're at a level of service D or better coming out of Angelo Drive.
Is that D, did you say?
Yes.
D, thank you.
Yep.
Just to clarify, that's basically the same as existing condition today for Angelo, roughly?
Yeah, so coming out of Angelo Drive
In the PM
today,
peak,
all of the cars that were coming out in the PM peak hour,
Turn
which
right.
was new, we're both taking a right-hand turn. So they were at a level of service B because it's easier to take a right-hand turn, and that's why it's showing
That's what I
that
expected.
first, but
Okay.
yeah, yep. So based on the operational analysis showing very little impact to the adjacent roadway network from this project, and the safety analysis showing that there was no safety issues, we feel that this project can be adequately accommodated by the existing roadway network, and that there's really no additional mitigation that would be required for the project. I know Kevin's already touched on the fact that sidewalks are proposed along Daniel Webster Highway, along the frontage, and connecting into Angelo Drive as mitigation for the project, and the fact that Angelo Drive can be regraded to assist with that difficult grade that's turning in. So otherwise, we feel that there's really no additional mitigation that would be required for this project.
Thank you for the presentation. Did a really good job of explaining a lot of difficult concepts and details. Do members of the board have questions? Tom?
So, talk to me about this southbound left-hand turn into Angelo Drive. How do those people queue up, and what happens to the traffic on DW Highway when somebody's waiting to take a left-hand turn?
Sure. So where this is located is actually where Daniel Webster Highway is starting to widen out to form 4 lanes. So it's going from 1 lane out to 4 lanes in that area. So
4? Is it?
2 in each direction.
There's a,
yeah, because there's 2 in each direction, but it widens out to provide a right turn lane and a left turn lane at the signal. So that's why I say 4 lanes. But yes, 2 through lanes and then the turning lanes. So there is adequate space for someone to be able to pull, if they want to turn left into Angelo Drive, they can pull towards the center line, and another vehicle can still go around them without having to use the shoulder at all. If a vehicle is uncomfortable with waiting in traffic like that, they are able to go down to the signal at Greeley Street and make a legal U-turn and come back in and take a right-hand turn into Angelo Drive as an alternative to that.
okay, but if somebody's stopping to take a left, there's a divided center line there across Angelo Drive, right, on DW Highway?
There is a center line, yes, not a median, but a center line.
No, but it's even divided. It's even widened out a little bit right in front of
Correct.
Angelo Drive.
Yep.
So it's double lines both ways or something? Is it legal to take a turn there?
I don't believe it is actually
You may
divided.
need
Can you
some
zoom in on
striping,
that
I would
area?
think.
It's on Google Maps. It's double yellow, but they're not a few inches apart. They're yellow, 2 yellow stripes.
Yeah.
It's two,
Two-
double-
two-
there's
two to
yellow,
3 feet
2
apart,
sets
but-
of yellow lines with about 3 foot between them.
So does it make sense to restripe that or repaint that at all
there
for a
you can
left
see
turn
it
movement,
right there.
or?
I don't believe that it is wide enough for a left turn movement. What could occur is probably what's known as a left turn bypass shoulder, where you would basically stop some of the striping for the shoulder and allow people to go around who are going straight through on the shoulder. We'd have to look to see if it's wide enough for an actual dedicated lane.
I wouldn't expect a dedicated lane, but some kind
Yeah,
of
and I don't
restriping,
think it
because
would
right now
warrant
there's
it,
nothing to
and-
indicate that you should be able to take a left-hand turn right there.
And
very
certainly
few
a
people are
break
gonna
in
go down
that
and do a U-turn.
could be allowed.
So, they're gonna pull into that divided area there, and folks that are wanting to come straight down are gonna get surprised and have to pull over to the right, which is gonna get the people in the right-hand lane to pull over into the shoulder, and
I don't think they're going to need, just looking at the image, it is true that it's in the midst of the widening and the tapering, that it appears that there's almost enough room for 2 vehicles to pass each other within the lane as it is in that area. If you go to the north a little bit, you can see where it narrows up right around the entrance to the preschool.
I understand that.
It's about 20 feet wide
Yeah.
going by
Yeah,
there.
I mean, I
so
think the
it's-
width is there. I
it
think
is
that
wide
normally
enough.
there's a break in the yellow line when you expect people to turn across it.
Right, and I drive it fairly regularly, and so I start pulling over to the right because I'm gonna take a right turn and go off towards the highway there. And if somebody suddenly pulls to the right to get around a car who stopped to take a left-hand turn, I suspect there's an accident waiting to happen right there. And so I'm just curious if there's any way we can mitigate that or try to solve that
Yeah, we may be able to
problem.
remove a portion of that median island, that striped median island, at the driveway, definitely. And we may even be able to take a couple of feet from the median island and a few feet from the travel lane and put in a short pocket there.
We haven't had, Fuss and O'Reilly hasn't peer reviewed this yet, so if there is a comment about that, I'm sure it'll come to peer review, but it just doesn't happen at this stage.
That's what I was gonna ask next. Has it been peer
The
reviewed?
peer review has just started because there
Just
was an
started, okay.
issue.
Good, yeah.
We had a glitch where the PO for Fuss and O'Neill got stuck in somebody's spam folder, so it took a couple extra days before we could actually get it processed. But, yes. it has been sent, they have all the
Okay.
materials, they are
All
going to
right,
be going.
good. I'll look forward to their analysis. It sounded good from here, but
Sure.
I'd like to
So-
hear it.
It does sound good, but there are a couple of spots, especially where Angelo Drive comes out, that
Yeah.
I'm nervous.
Mm-hmm.
So with the peer review going already, but we're still potentially reconfiguring Angelo Drive and then potentially satisfying some second entrance for the fire department, are we just going to do peer review twice, or is there some reason why don't we wait until the design is what it is before we peer review
We
it?
typically send it back to peer review after a conditional final approval is made. So there's the initial peer review, any revisions get made, the planning board makes their final decision, and then when the final plans for signature come in, that's when peer review takes their second shot at it. That's typically the process that we use for projects.
Well, all right, I think in a lot of projects that makes some sense when the changes that are done are relatively modest, but a second driveway entrance across 3 36-inch drainage pipes and reconfiguring the slope of the road to 7 degrees and putting a hammerhead and all of that stuff are some pretty significant chunks that I would want to be in the CLD review when it comes to us, I would think. I mean, those aren't little things that are tweaked. that need a
I
little-
would suggest that if there's anything that appears to be a significant concern to Public Works or my staff, that we would do that. If it doesn't appear to be a significant concern, and I would rely heavily on Public Works and their opinion on that, then we would follow our standard procedure of waiting until after it's got an approval.
I don't know. What do you think of that, guys? I think that leaves us with.
In this particular case, I don't want to speak in general, but in this particular case, I don't know how much the change of grade to Angelo Drive will affect this, this analysis. And I don't think we're talking about a completely open access to Horseshoe, Island Drive. So,
And there's already been a previous design on this project that's already happened and been peer reviewed, so we have that to start with.
Yes.
so I'm not too worried about this one, Bob.
No, I am not either.
But some I would be, you know,
Yeah.
I think.
There's an awful lot of water flowing across this site to deal with the drainage, and that's where my thought comes from. I think, traffic flow isn't going to change based on there being a hammerhead or something like that to analyze. But this is a fairly complicated site drainage-wise, because for whatever reason they're the repository of half the drainage in town already, through no fault of their own. And that's going to have to get dealt with over into some kind of a outlet structure that isn't designed yet.
That was dealt with on the previous application, but me as an engineer, I can't just blankly stamp that. I need to verify that, which is why I'm going to the extensive of evaluating that drainage area. But that was a reviewed, previous application took that into account.
But you realize that what you just said is we should trust an old plan, but you're not going to trust an old plan. You need to look at it before you're going to stamp it, but you want us to bless it without. I mean, if you need to relook at it again, why don't we?
There's a difference between somebody's stamp on a plan and somebody reviewing a plan.
I know, and the stamp and the signature on this plan will also be mine. It's part of our role. Now, I don't want to be a stickler for details because we do, the normal process on these sites don't have very significant things that aren't there for the first time for the review, but this one raises a couple of eyebrows for me with some of the things that we just don't know. I mean, certainly, I think it's highly unlikely the fire department likes the second entrance onto DW Highway as being its second entrance. I appreciate, offering it up and as a solution, but I think it's got some other complications that may make that probably not the choice. But if it was,
We don't know yet until we have that discussion. They might like a widened section within the existing development. They might not ask for a second means. We don't know yet until I have that conversation with fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that. And I want them to be as flexible as possible, and I want to encourage you guys to be as flexible as possible. But in terms of what CLD is looking at, the idea that there could be a road over here, or maybe it's paved, maybe it's gravel, maybe it's 12 feet wide, maybe it's 20 feet wide, how do they do their work? And what do we get back for a product?
Well, we do it over is what Tim said.
This is not unusual. I don't see that this situation is any different than how we review any other plan, to be honest with you.
No, I didn't say the review process is
and
different.
I-
The significant changes that are not in front of CLD now
And
are
we've-
much bigger than what we've seen for other projects.
I can think of many that have had bit more.
Tell me about one.
Merrimack Premium Outlets.
What did they do differently in their engineering for Merrimack Premium Outlets that wasn't part of the engineering review?
There was, in terms of the site plan that we just did with the roundabout, the conditional approval that was granted prior to that roundabout design being anywhere near complete, I would consider to be similar in terms of scope of review to what we're talking about here.
What level of
There was
incompleteness
literally,
was there in that plan?
there was literally no actual engineering given to that roundabout on the original site plan. It had to have a separate application come in.
That was because it was owned by somebody different.
It did do so, but you're not talking about building a roundabout on a parcel where maybe there's nothing there now, or it's a completely separate entrance to the road, or, I mean, some of these changes are not trivial.
I'm not suggesting that they are. I'm just suggesting that given the relationship that we have with CLD and the confidence that I have in them as a reviewing agent and the confidence I have in the applicant's engineer that has worked in this community for decades and has been one of the more, not to toot their horn more than I should, but one of the more complete and competent firms that designs plans that come before this board, I have no doubt in my mind that this is going to be handled appropriately.
I'm not looking to suggest that the applicant isn't going to come up with a solution either. We've got a role as a planning board to give it a look. You got to design it. I mean, we were just talking about that with some of these earlier simple projects where there's not engineers involved, but same thing. Vote on something that isn't on the paper. I mean, how do we do that?
But we don't give a final approval till we get, very easily, if there's changes, we don't give a final approval till we get CLD's second review.
Well, that's not the normal process. The second review comes after the conditional final approval.
That's right, but I'm saying that's.
It
an
all
option
depends
that's
on your
given.
level of confidence and where the applicant is at. We're not asking you to conditionally prove anything tonight. We're not ready. The peer review's not in. I'm not gonna ask you to conditionally prove anything tonight.
Well, whether it's next time or
I'm
this
saying next time, you're gonna have a recommendation from my staff and the other departments as to whether or not we believe it's appropriate to approve it or not. If we don't think it's appropriate and we don't think there's enough information, we're not gonna recommend you approve it.
I wasn't really talking about the public works and the fire department. The engineering review that we're having CLD do, and we're gonna pay them to do a second time as a part of our normal course, is gonna come in.
We're not paying.
Well.
Yes.
Somebody's paying them.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. And obviously that information is relevant, or we wouldn't force CLD to do a re-review, but it doesn't come before the board again, and in a lot of cases, I get that those differences are relatively minor. On this particular application, I see big differences.
In this particular application, we would have had CLD comments by now, which would have probably changed your opinion on this.
Well, in my opinion, we need an exit through Island Drive still, so.
Are you thinking about an exit for everybody or an emergency only, or?
I think it ought to be an exit for everybody, because I think Angelo Drive's gonna be difficult enough for people to get in and out of, that it's gonna be troublesome, and that Island Drive and Angelo Drive allow a choice.
Anyway, we don't have to answer the question about engineering review tonight. We can see what we get.
Particularly
for review.
given the time.
Tom, I don't disagree with you in terms of the two entrances. I
don't
think
either.
that
I'm with Tom on that too.
I think that as much as the neighbors on Island Drive don't want to hear it, I think that Angelo Drive is a tough exit for all of this traffic to get out through. And given at least a couple of choices, gives a little bit of an option for folks, both turning in and turning out. Isn't necessarily all the solution, but anyway. What business do we have to take care of here tonight to give you some more advice or some more feedback, or are there solutions and decisions you need us to?
I guess my first comment would be, what was identified in the traffic analysis that you just heard that warrants this particular location, Angelo Drive, not adequate? Everything I heard says it meets the requirements and it is adequate. A second means of egress, I believe is emergency use only, but I won't know until I have my discussion with the fire department on that one.
Sure. Fire department's choice on egress is a little different than I think what Tom's after and what I'm kind of supporting him on. I think that you got a situation at Angelo Drive which is D or better right now, which is, I get that that's, you know, regarded as some level of acceptable service, but it's certainly not very good service. And I don't know that Island Drive is better than a D, but at least having a choice between two separate Ds is better than funneling everything through one D.
But you're also asking Island Drive, which is a public road, to traverse a private development, which I think is going to trigger some issues with NeighborWorks.
Island Drive
Isn't Island Drive, Island Pond Drive, is that not a public road?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
want
are,
you to
we are
connect to it.
proposing a private development. If you're asking Island Drive residents the ability to traverse through NeighborWorks property as a second means, or
No, no,
vice
I-
versa.
That
why
wouldn't be
wouldn't
my
they?
intention that they
It's
would
your
do that.
second
They
entrance,
might.
not theirs.
Well, that would be the case if it was a full open public
It's
access.
open to anybody.
Anybody could go from Island Drive through to Angelo, and vice versa. People could come from this out to Island Drive. If
Or
it's
they could go
open,
through the development
really
to
isn't
get to
a way to
Island
stop
Drive
them.
because there's traffic in front of them. And use it as a cut through.
I think that's a little bit of a red herring as much as it is to say, you know, to get to Greeley Street, I cut into the Dunkin' Donuts and drive behind the Common Man and past where Wendy's used to be and all of that stuff. And, what's that?
You don't do that?
You know, yeah, you can
I
drive
just
through there
see
if you
it-
want to cut that corner and cut that light, but do people really do that? Come on.
I could see someone cutting through this development to get to Island Drive if you opened it up in that fashion. And
So
we've
come
got
off of
parking
DW
spaces
Highway
that
to
are.
get to Island Drive?
No.
You'd cut through the development to get to Island Pond Drive because the
From
traffic's
Angelo,
slower in front of you.
Go down Angelo, through the development
Yes.
to get onto Island Pond Drive. Well, no, I don't
It's
think
Island
so.
Drive. It's not
It's,
Island
it's,
Pond.
go- it's, I don't think getting into Island Pond Drive is easy. It's getting out of Island
no
Pond.
Island Drive, no pond.
Island Drive, whatever it is. It's not getting into it, it's getting out of it. And I can see that people might just take that because if at 5 o'clock or 4:30 or 5 o'clock on a weekday afternoon, getting up Island Drive's turn and trying to go either north or south is very difficult.
I would
So-
think it's
so is
easier
Angelo.
further away from the light. I mean, Angelo is real close to the light. I would think that creates a real problem trying to take a left
No,
turn.
you get gaps. By the time you
There's
get...
no gaps when people are queued up at the red
Well,
light.
all right.
I
I'm
mean,
not
to take
gonna
a,
argue.
to go south.
Last item I'd like to point out is this whole design is revolved around a neighborhood type feeling where you're backing out of your parking spaces into the travel way. And my other concern, safety concern, would be any sort of
It's not
cross-link.
designed like a road at all.
It is definitely not a road by any means.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to, unless you've got anything else, I feel we should move this matter to whatever it is, whenever a date's suitable, because we have other matters to discuss tonight, and there are two gentlemen, I think, over there, who I think want to talk about their project, but I'm not trying to stop you.
As long as we've done with business, the applicant thinks that we need to get dealt with today. And I know that we've been kind of tough on some of these decisions, and we're going to look for some more information. But again, I don't want to overlook the good things that you got in your application. I don't want this to be an experience where you feel like all we did was highlight things that we aren't sure of or, you know, want to see differently. But I do want to make sure that we've done the business that you want done. I think that satisfying DPW on the development of the slope of Angelo Drive and the Hammerhead thing goes a long way to solving that issue. The other access through Greeley Street's obviously off the table since it doesn't make sense, and we already granted this lot line adjustment that does away with that parcel anyway. So you don't have to worry about that bit of business. You got the parking the way that you'd like. I don't know what the answer is to the fire department in terms of their second means of egress, whether they'll find a different solution. I think even without that, there's some sentiment on the board to want to have a second means of entrance and egress for the patrons. Talk us out of it, you know. Show us what that argument looks like for, you know, why that's something that we shouldn't aim for. And, you know, we'll give you an open mind and take a listen to that stuff. Otherwise, I think that generally speaking, you got an application that's in pretty good shape for final approval, assuming that all the engineering reviews come back the way they're supposed to. I am nervous about the gaps in the plan that are still yet to be developed, that are being reviewed, as I just kind of spent some significant amount of time talking about, but we'll work through those things. Is there anything else that you need from us today?
No, I feel the board has adequately answered my questions, particularly lot line adjustment, the waiver request, and you've pointed out your areas of concern, so this was a productive meeting.
Yeah. Thank you for particularly the traffic study. I don't think that we would ask or require of you any further details or follow-up questions to be answered on traffic studies.
Unless peer review does.
Unless
Peer review, yeah.
Unless peer review does.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion we can.
When's good for you to come back?
I'm going to make the next meeting. I don't really have a choice.
Well, you've got all the information in by tomorrow?
Today for August 7th. Can't make August 7th. August 21 is the next available.
Given that we're talking about peer review, there may or may not be a chance to really revise plans, but I think if we come to a comfort level with peer review where it stands and Fire and Public Works, there is a timing issue because of the way that NeighborWorks funds their projects. So our recommendation was to continue to August 7th.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to continue this matter to August the 7th at 7 p.m. in this room with no further notice to abutters.
Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second that.
Second for that motion. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 4-0-0. Okay, so we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you for your time, board.
Thank you. Item number 8 on our agenda is Merrimack Stone Industries as the applicant and Adherex Inc. as the owner. Review for acceptance and consideration of a site plan to construct a 7,000 square foot warehouse. The parcel is located at 7 Webb Drive in the I-1 Industrial District, tax map 2D, lot 35. Tim, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
No, I will just note that you've got the memo from Kelly in the packet. Cutting to the chase, there's a couple of minor issues regarding some waivers that potentially need to be submitted. And again, we do not have the peer review completed on this project either, so our recommendation is to continue to August 7 or later date as applicable.
Okay, excellent. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your project.
This one working?
I think so.
This is a button. Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Earl Sanford of Sanford Surveying.
Switch it on. I don't think that you're on.
Here, is that better?
There we go.
Better.
All right.
Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Earl Sanford of Sanford Surveying and Engineering, here to present for Merrimack Stone Industries. And the owner is here with me. I'll let him introduce himself later. But the basic, we're on Webb Drive. It's an industrial site. This is the existing conditions plan. The end of Webb Drive, there's a driveway that goes up to the site, an existing 20-plus square foot building for which he cuts granite, makes countertops and that sort of thing. And he has a nice flat spot off to the right, which the intent is to, he's outgrowing what he has now, so he's proposing to add a 7,000 square foot metal building with with the pavement going around it. The impervious area will be mitigated in terms of stormwater by 3 basins that will be placed around the site. The parking is designed to be adequate, slightly more than what is required, has been pointed out in the staff memo. We would like a waiver for the sidewalk, as it's industrial, and I don't see that it would, our proposal is that it wouldn't be appropriate for this site. And for architecturals, we've given the structural plans, which show the elevations and from all 4 sides, but they're not all fancily rendered, and if that's suitable for this application, we'd like to, if that needs a waiver not to accept those, then we'd like that as well to be one of the waivers. We're anticipating any work to, this will all end up being a grassed area. He's willing to plant some trees too, but that's something we'd look maybe for a little guidance on. So we've covered, originally we weren't going to have a bathroom and then decided to put a bathroom in. We're right next to the septic tank, so it's going to be a short run to the septic tank, and we can extend the water line out of the building just 20 feet or so to connect. So there is a note that no water and sewer, but that's no additional service required off of Webb Drive. It'll just be pulled out of the existing building. So that's basically, there's a minimal amount of grading because of the spot that's there already. We would be looking to, right now he's overflowing into some storage trailers, and we're looking to change that and be able to put things inside the proposed building. It's late. My mind's mush, so I'll hand it over to you guys.
Thank you for the brevity. I think it's a fairly simple, straightforward design. I think it's just getting some peer review done so that we can take a look at what they do.
And the other two waivers that we could take up at the next meeting is there's no landscape plan or lighting plan. If the board doesn't feel the need for those would need to be waivers or that need to be provided.
I mean, we're showing packs, and then we have the detail for down lighting pack. So we're showing it, but not with all.
Not with the illumination.
Not with all those contours for lumens and everything, but.
I think you got a fairly substantial sized parcel where the possibility that you're flowing light off of your site pretty minimal on a big site like this.
Correct, and it's industrial all around, so it's.
Yeah. So first order of business is to accept the application as complete.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we accept this application as complete for us to make an intelligent decision.
Is there a second?
I didn't see any architectural, you were going to
Waiver request for that.
What?
There's a waiver request.
for that.
Oh, so he's saying it's complete and, okay.
Apart from the waivers.
Apart from the waivers, then I'll second the motion, apart from the waivers.
Okay. Motion and a second to accept the application as complete for review. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 400 to accept the application as complete. So we've got a waiver request for to eliminate the need for the architectural designs.
Sidewalk is the other one that's been requested. And then if the board feels appropriate, it's either provide lighting details in the landscape plan or we need waivers for those as well.
Okay. So what is the will of the board to take up first? There's 4 potential waivers here. 2 that the applicants asked for and 2 that may be necessary based on the state of the design.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we grant all 4 waivers because the
we don't have waivers for the other 2 yet.
Oh, I make a motion we grant the waivers on under section 705.19 sidewalks and section 1205 building renderings based on the relative specific circumstances relative to the subdivision indicate the waiver will carry out the spirit and intent of the regulations.
Site plan.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion to grant the 2 waivers the applicants requested?
No, why are we, I mean, I'll go along with the sidewalk, but why are we waivering the architectural? I don't get that.
It's an industrial site, and I bet the building's going to look very like the existing ones, and nobody's there, nobody sees it.
Shall I give him the?
Oh,
take a look. Yeah.
Oh, we've got something.
They're just not.
Yeah, like I was saying, we've supplied the
Oh,
structural
yeah, I didn't
plan
understand this. This is just the structural. That's not,
Right.
that's not the
So it's-
architectural.
I
I've got
understand.
those, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, yeah.
Southern end of DW
If you
towards
go,
Nashua.
if you go,
Looking at Webb Drive.
Okay, I didn't go to Webb Drive, I'll
That doesn't
admit
look
that.
like this, actually. Well, that doesn't look like this. I can't find anything that looks like this.
You looking just like Google Maps or something?
Yeah.
well, it looks a bit like it if you drive down there.
Let's see if we
I've
can
been
find
there,
it.
yeah.
This is an aerial view.
This is
I ought to be able to see an aerial view that looks like that somewhere.
go further north. There you are.
Where am I? Okay, so what's this big metal building sticking out?
That's the existing,
That's the existing building.
it's,
Doesn't look like that at all.
So the one that I'm looking at least looks generally like the shape of this building with the pavement in this area.
Okay.
well, what the heck is going on with Google Maps there for you, Tom?
I don't know.
It's
My Google Maps
A
has
lot of stone stored outside, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Just doesn't look the same. There's a shed on the back? No.
Looks like there's some kind of canopies or lean-tos or.
There's
Just
some,
a straight build.
there's some trailers at the back. And there's a water tank at the back.
For whatever reason, the little caption on the building says Kurava.
Yeah, but I was trying to get it, you don't show any trees or any kind of undergrowth or anything like that. What I was trying to understand is if this is totally visible from Webb Drive or not, and it's not. There's trees all around it, right?
From Webb Drive? No, from Webb Drive.
All of that area there is full of trees.
It's cleared.
Is what?
On Google Maps, it's got trees.
Not in Google Maps, it's all treed. I mean, you can barely see where the trailers are because there's trees overhanging.
There's trees at the back.
There's a
The-
vegetation, but
We submitted something last year at this time, and he had
It
piles
was
of
an
refuse
enforcement issue,
stone
yeah.
all through the trees. And the directive we got was to clean that up, because that, as kind of a first step. In that process, because they were within the trees, they took most of the trees down to be able to get that stone out of there and clean the site up as was
Okay.
directed.
I gotcha.
Oh, okay.
So,
Is it or is it not visible from Webb Drive?
From Webb, yes.
yes.
You can see it from Webb Drive.
But
You
you
see
can't
one-
see
yeah.
it from DW.
Not from
Highway.
DW, no.
No, yeah.
so we still have a motion without a second, but let's talk a little bit about what some of the choices are. You can ask for or refuse to waive the requirement for elevations and look at what the outside of a metal building looks like, and I can probably draw that for you. The other waiver that's up for the consideration is whether we waive the requirement for a landscaping plan.
Nope, that's not before you yet.
Well, it's one of the
No,
ones we
so-
talked about
Yes.
potentially coming before us, and it could be something that we discuss tonight orally with the applicant. I'm inclined to not have them give me a landscape plan for the whole site, but to commit to putting some trees between that building and Webb Drive, to screen it. And I think screening the building with some trees is more important of an answer or more important information to me than what does the outside of your metal building look like. Now, the other thing I didn't consider is what's the length of this building, and does it meet that requirement we have where the uninterrupted 100-foot length has to be, offset in some way.
7,000 square feet. I know.
It's 140 foot.
140 feet, so our regulation does say, 100 feet has to be
100
broken
feet.
up.
Must have a break in it.
And so we've either got to waive that or screen the thing.
The waiver request for building design was general enough that we would consider, if you do grant the waiver to provide the renderings, it would also include the break in the building. It's to the overall section.
So, again, Alistair has made a motion that we grant the waiver of the elevations and the waiver of the sidewalk in one vote. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it now that I better understand.
Okay. There's a second for that. I think, speaking to the motion, I think one way or another, either screen it or make it look nice from Webb Drive. Trees can be a solution, making the building architecturally interesting or having some offsets in the length of the building is a solution for us, but it's probably a terrible one for you guys because you want a building that's rectangular and doesn't have jogs and offsets in it. It doesn't make any sense from your warehouse standpoint to have jogs and offsets in it. So I think that screening is probably the solution that's better for you guys. I don't know, it's not a ton of trees, but it takes some trees to do that screening for that to be effective. I think at some point, once as we're voting on this, we're sort of making that choice between which way we're going to go, and do we, ask you to provide us with some information about what you would do to screen it if we grant this motion that says we don't really care what the building looks like? Is that okay as an approach to you guys?
I think so. I mean, I do think it's appropriate to realize that the only traffic on this road is industrial workers coming to work and going back. So I would hope it wouldn't have to be a opaque screen, but something tastefully done to break up the lines. I'm thinking maybe a 25-foot on center type of arrangement, but that's,
That's probably, I'm thinking the same way. Yeah, you don't have to completely screen the building so it's invisible, but do some things to break it up a little bit. And I understand industrial sites and industrial sites on dead-end roads, but we still want to take a little bit of a care for the approach and what it looks like. And I would imagine you probably do too. So there is a motion and a second to grant these two waivers. Is there anybody else that wants to speak to the motions, or are we ready to vote?
I'm ready.
Nobody else wants to speak to them? All in favor of granting both waivers, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? 4-0-0. So that grants those two waivers. We are going to look at continuing until we get the peer review, as the staff had recommended. I think that as a part of what we hear next time will be some explanation of some detail on what that screening is going to look like. And it'll still, I think, be a waiver of the requirement for a landscape plan, because you don't want to do that much detail, but you got to come and give us some explanation of what you are committing to do. And then I think that you probably do need the waiver of the lighting plan, because it doesn't make any sense to do one. I don't want to see it, but ask us. Formally ask for the waiver.
The plan does say they're going to fit six wall pack type lights mounted to the exterior of the structure, and they did a detail on sheet 3.
I think you mentioned
It's
that
just we don't have the ground level foot candle measurements.
No,
that's what we're missing.
That's what we're waiving, yeah.
We can waiver that next time. Yeah.
Right.
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman.
This one, we just got the check for the escrow today, I believe.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a minimum of 10 days before that comes back. So this
August 21.
Either August 21 will ensure us enough time to make sure that we get the comments to them and make any revisions. So.
Does that work for you guys for a timeline? August 21st.
And I'll let Alex introduce himself.
Yeah.
Just so any comments you have.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alex Bilot. I'm the owner of Merrimack Stone. I was overseas for a couple of weeks, and that's why the check didn't come in until today. So jet lagged, actually. Yeah, I mean, the sooner the better. Whatever the soonest is that we can do this. Is August 7th impossible? Probably, right?
We probably won't have. You won't have enough time to react to the peer review comments if we go for August.
Oh, I see. Because it's got to get okay. Oh, that's fine then. Then it's August 21.
Mr. Chairman, may I therefore make a motion we continue this matter till August the 21st at 7 p.m. in this room, with no further notice to abutters.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion?
Second that. Yeah.
Second for Alistair's motion. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 4-0-0. Tim, you're reaching
Can
for
you
the
just
microphone.
say for the record that you opened a public hearing?
Okay.
For the record, we open.
Can you say you're going to?
All right. So for the purposes of doing that, let's set aside that motion to continue and move on to the next item. Briefly, open up the floor to the public. There's nobody coming forward. We'll close the public hearing. We've done that. And now let's position our motion
Motion has
to
been
continue.
done. We're good. As long as it's on the record, we're good.
So we'll see you in a few weeks.
And there's no flexibility with the agenda, is there? I mean, I think we're a shorter project, so to be behind one that goes on
Right.
for hours.
As of right now, the car wash would be the only other thing on the agenda right now for that night.
So never mind.
Yeah.
You mean you don't like sitting and listening to us till 10:30 at night?
Actually, I want to make a comment on that. I'm originally from Italy. My wife is from Mexico, and I'm so happy that this area was colonized by the British, because meetings like these in countries of origin where I'm from are such a mess. And you guys are so incredibly professional, and I'm really impressed by this whole.
Thank you.
Good.
People
Thank you for saying
complain.
that. We
People
certainly try.
complain here have no idea what they're. what they have.
If I make a suggestion, if you've ever attended a meeting in Nigeria, you're going to know.
All right. I haven't had the pleasure of doing that either. So we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Thank you for coming in.
Appreciate your time.
Oh,
Can I just
Nelson.
say one more thought
Yeah.
that I wanted to share with you? You talked about earlier having storage of stone outside. I don't see any place on here for that. Is that?
That's the purpose of this building.
Okay. You
Well,
rather
it is,
be not-
but there still is some transfer as he wheels it out.
Oh, sure,
It gets
sure.
knocked,
Yeah.
so I do want to, I told him we probably should add that to the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
good idea.
Yeah. And if you're gonna make storage outside, that's not a problem if you show us where it is on the
Yes.
plan.
That was the reason why we had the enforcement action, because there was no place on the plan designated for outdoor storage
Yeah, and
previously.
it didn't seem to show up here, but thank you.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for your kind words. You know, somebody thinks we're efficient.
Yeah, there we go. We are up to the point of item 9, which is discussion and possible action regarding other items of concern, to which we've added a couple of bullet points. The first of which is Tim's presentation here now
Oh,
about
that's-
school children and some of the subdivision developments that we've done.
Oh, yeah.
I can make this as fast as you would like.
Well, I certainly want the information, but
The
I
information is good, but it's, once you get past the first couple of projects, it's pretty repetitive, so.
Is there a handout or is there?
No.
No.
I didn't want you guys to know what I was gonna say before I came. I will make available the PDF of this, I will certainly email out to anybody who's
Thank
interested.
you. Thank you.
This presentation goes back to December 2015 meeting. There was a joint meeting between the school board and the town council back in that year, where I outlined the 6 projects that are on the screen. At the time, in 2015, we were talking about Flatley, Edgebrook, what now is known as Merrimack Park Place by the Merrimack Premium Outlets, Chestnut Hill, Tomasian, and then Crosswoods Path, which was that conversion from retail to 21 multifamily units. The other projects we've now added to this presentation post-2015 is the Greenfield Farm subdivision, the Goshen subdivision, the 280 units of multifamily at Executive Park Drive, Neighbor Works and Bowers Landing, both of which you saw here tonight.
Where's Goshen?
Y'all get there. You'll recognize it when I get there.
We also
It's the
added
one
the
off of
overlook
Amherst
thing.
Road. Flatley project, as you're all familiar, off of Daniel Webster Highway. The initial site plan is for 240 units of multifamily housing, the first 4 buildings of which have now been granted their approvals. The conditional use permit was in 2015, Phase 1 site plan signed by the board in 2017. The project is now under construction. The multipliers I use to determine the number of school-age children we anticipate on these projects comes from the Hampshire Housing Finance. It was a very elaborate, full statewide study done by Russ Tebow of Applied Economic Research in Laconia, looking at the variety of different types of residential housing units and determining the number of school-age children that each type of those units produces. When you get into multifamily development, the average number of school-age children per unit is 0.17. So out of those 240 units for multifamily for Flatley, we're expecting to see somewhere around 41 school-age children to come out of that project. Edgebrook Heights, southern part of DW Highway near the Nashua Town Line. Conditional approval in 2014 for the CUP. It was held up by a lawsuit. The approvals have now expired. There is a settlement agreement in the works between the developer and abutters. We actually will be meeting with the project engineer next week to discuss potential resubmission of this project. So what we expect is that it will likely be resubmitted as a new application either later this year or next year, with that mixed of use to be likely modified based on the discussions between the abutters. Merrimack Park Place, which is the 20-acre parcel at the entrance to Merrimack Premium Outlets, which was recently approved by the board. Just give you a quick overview of the plan: multifamily development, mixed use with hotel, retail, event center, and professional office space. Conditional use permit approval in 2018. The site plan was conditionally approved back on March 6th. 192 units of residential. There's a hybrid multiplier I've used for this, which was discussed when we went through the conditional use permit process. We've used the 0.17 multifamily multiplier for the 2-bedroom units. For the 1-bedroom units, we've used a similar type of study that was done on 1-bedroom units. that estimates there's 0.046 age children in one-bedroom units, and then 0 for studio apartments. So based on the mix that they're proposing of 36 studios, 84 one-bedrooms, and 72 two-bedrooms, we're only anticipating about 13 school-age children out of that project. Chestnut Hill, which has cleared all the lots for where there potentially would be building at some point south of the Merrimack Middle School. 72 lot subdivision configured in between Meadow and Bennett Lane and Old Blood Road. 72 lots were was signed by the board in 2016. To date, there's been no movement on any construction beginning. For single-family homes, the study basically has a range of multipliers, 0.9 for a two-bedroom home to 0.99 for a four-bedroom home. This averages out to 0.64 for all single-family homes. So what I provided in these cases is an average estimate using the 0.64, which would be about 47 kids. And then if these are all four-bedroom units, the high would be about 72 kids out of this project. Tomasian Cluster Subdivision, this is a, go ahead.
Back to that one.
Sure.
No motion has happened, but I've seen somebody advertising that, so.
I would be shocked. This is another project where we're going to be having a meeting with the people who got it approved, who are actually, Mr. Tenhave is not actually the one who wants to build this project. He's marketing it, trying to sell it. We've met with several potential people looking at this project, and we keep getting the same answer that the density does not support the amount of off-site improvements and construction costs that are associated with the project. So unless something changes, I don't anticipate this happening for quite some time.
This one still requires a sewer.
Yeah, that's one of the big things that's preventing
Which is
this.
why we gave them an additional 4 or 6
Exactly.
units or something.
That was specific to the zoning board's variance request, yes.
Thank you.
Yep, Tomasian off of Leicester, Tomasian Drive, Amherst Road. This is known as Windy Hollow Circle. It's a 19-lot cluster subdivision that's nearing or may actually be completed at this point from when I did the presentation. That multiplier is the same as it was. I did an average and a high. The average of 13, the high of 19. The actual enrollment as of April of 2018 was 3 students out of the 15 completed homes at that point. Crosswood Path, this was the project that converted a former multi-tenant retail commercial building into 21 multi-family units. The estimated school-age children out of this was 4. At full build-out and full occupancy, there is, as of April, only 1 student currently out of that building. Greenfield Farms, this is the project up by the Bedford Town Line off of Wire Road. 66-lot cluster subdivision signed by the board in October of last year. No movement as of date, although the rumors I hear is that sometime in August they may start doing some of the work out there from LaMontagne Builders. An average estimate is 43, and a high estimate, if everything's 4-bedroom, would be 66. Goshen, this is the subdivision off of Amherst Road, 12-lot cluster subdivision. One of the reasons why Dan Ricker is now on the planning board. This was the project that got him involved as an abutter and got him interested in the process. He lives not too far from here on Merrill Road. This project was conditionally approved in December. You guys have recently granted an extension to meet those conditions last month. We're looking at an average of 8 and a high of 12 out of this project. Executive Park Drive, which I think everybody's familiar with, the 280 units conditionally approved. Using that multiplier of 0.17, we're estimating about 48 kids out of this. NeighborWorks, which we just discussed tonight, so you don't need to really see the plan. Previously 57-unit elderly was presented conceptually. The first public hearing tonight on the 45 units, using our multifamily estimate that we're estimating 8 school-age children for that project. And then Bowers Landing, again, was discussed here tonight. 65-unit multifamily, but it's actually detached single-family units. All of these are 2-bedrooms. The multiplier, if we use the multifamily, is 0.17, it's 11. If we use the single-family multiplier for 2-bedroom units, it's actually lower at .09, so we'd actually, the range is from 6 to 11 kids we expect out of this phase of the project. And here's your summary. Since 2005, at various stages, we have about 1,012 new residential units in process. 169 of those are single-family lots. 843 of those are multifamily. The range of kids we can expect out of these developments is anywhere from 231 to 294, based on the TIBO study. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Tim.
Could we have those as a
Yes.
slide, or?
Yep, I can send you a PDF.
Thank you.
PDF.
That'd be great.
You post that too on the planning boards or the community development's website?
I can do that.
Thanks. I don't, at this hour, I don't have any other questions or discussion about it.
Thank you.
I think that there are some other subdivisions that are minor, like Brett Vaughn's thing.
Sure. At the time, I was looking for the major
Yeah.
single-family projects,
And I think the Overlook senior thing is not going to have any kids at all, but it's still, just in terms of keeping track of the housing units that have been approved, counts.
What do they call that one that's right down on the Nashua line? The one that's in contention?
That's Edgebrook.
That was on the list.
Yeah.
I didn't include that because technically, as of right now, those projects are expired. That project has no valid approval right now.
Oh, okay. That would add to this then.
Yeah, there was about 150 or so units in that.
Yeah.
But it was two-bedroom multifamily?
That was multifamily. I don't recall specifically the mix. I think it was primarily 2 bedrooms, yes. But at 150, I think.
18, 20 kids.
About 18 to 20 kids, yeah.
Or one bus route?
Thank you for that.
No, the bus goes there already.
Well, not down that road.
Not exactly, but it
it goes
picks up.
across the street at
Kids
Harris
will have to
Pond.
walk up
Picks
the
up
hill.
Harris Pond.
How many kids on a bus?
Anywhere up legally 71.
Really?
You're allowed to have 71. Most school bus companies don't try and pack that many middle and high schoolers, but certainly 71 for elementary, upper
yeah.
elementary. I carry 71. If everybody gets up and goes to school, of course. Whereas the high school, we work on 60 as a max.
Cool.
If they're a bit bigger kids.
Moving our agenda ahead a little bit, the next bullet point under other items of concern is a discussion of the Municipal Association services and recommendations to the town council for the 1920 town budget. And what Tim has prepared for us is a memo with some information from the website for the Municipal Association about the services that they offer.
I did ask the finance director today what the dues for the town would be. Off the top of his head, he didn't have the specific number, but it's between $20,000 and $25,000 a year.
That's for full membership.
Yep.
What's the difference between a full and associate, if I may ask?
Associate's not available to municipalities. It's available to some other things. If you read kind of the first paragraph under associate, it tells you that it's available for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I missed that first sentence.
For some other kinds of entities.
20K. Can I
yes,
suggest we talk about it next time?
I think that we should, but for two reasons. One, it's late and I don't want to talk about it now. And
To
two,
everybody who's here knows about the NHMA.
everybody that's here knows the answers, and we're preaching to the choir.
All right, good.
So,
Come back next week.
Well, I think there's some action that needs to go. I would suggest that we as a board take action to formally recommend to the council that we become a member of the association. I mean, it's nice that we have this discussion, but I think.
I think what Bob is saying is that the folks that aren't here are the ones that weren't familiar with the association, to involve them in making that decision.
Yeah, unless the timing is that recommendation has to come soon.
The budget isn't going to be until fall, so.
All
We're
right, so we
talking
got plenty
fall
of
and,
time.
Definitely
fall and winter is when budgets start
let's have
going.
some meetings with
On
Lynn
August
and
the
Neil
7th.
and Dan and some other folks.
So
involved.
October, the department heads.
Exactly, October will be when I have to submit my budget, so.
Okay, let's remember to
This
put
is
it
your
on the
budget?
agenda.
No, this would not be part of my budget, but just generally, department heads are
We should
required
do
to
it as
submit our
soon as
budgets by
possible,
October.
So we get any resistance, we can squash it.
I don't know what tools you think we've got to squash some resistance with.
Squash.
Well, in case the board, the councillors require a second push.
All right, the other business that's under the discussion and possible action regarding other items of concern is a request by Brett Vaughn as the applicant and Brett Vaughn Revocable Trust as the owner for an
Yeah.
extension of a conditional final approval of his 13-lot residential subdivision. The parcel is located at 123 Wilson Hill Road in the R1 Residential District, tax map 4A, lot 23. And ultimately, this boils down to he's still working on some things and nothing
Still
has
working on
changed
the
in our
local and
regs.
state conditions.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we grant an extension of the Mr. Vaughan's conditional final approval for a period of 6 months.
Per the memo effective August
As
7th.
per the memo from Kelly Schimmel on dated July the 9th, 2018.
So that will carry him through February 5th of 2019. Is there a second for Alistair's motion?
I'll second it, but I do want to point out that there has been no explanation of what the state of New Hampshire permitting process that is his excuse for being so late was. I don't know what that is.
Well, he has
but I
also
think
got an issue with the public works.
They're still working on not only the AOT permit from DES.
Okay, it is the AOT.
That's, yes,
All
it's
right,
AOT.
okay. That's a state. Okay, I'll let him go. I've seconded the
Alteration of terrain, yep.
Just for the
Yep,
public.
I appreciate that.
They still be watching us, although I doubt it.
They'll watch us on Tuesday for a rerun.
They'll watch us on YouTube later.
Yeah. I'm not sure how many YouTube hits we get. Maybe we do.
You actually get a fair amount.
You don't.
For YouTube? Oh, yeah.
People that go for.
It's
find out
insomnia.
What world those guys get. If you got insomnia, I guess we're the cure for it. Makes me sleepy. Okay, so if there's no other discussion on giving the extension for the Vaughan subdivision, then it's time for vote. All in favor of granting it, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 400 to grant that. Does anyone have any other items of discussion or concern to raise?
Not at this hour.
Not at this hour for me either. That brings us to the consideration of the approval of the minutes of June 19, 2018. What's the will
I'll
of the
move
board?
to approve those as submitted.
I agree, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to second that motion.
Motion to approve as submitted, properly seconded. Any discussion?
Just one, excuse me, just one question. On page 1, line 28, talks about separation added to the approaches, comma, a painted gore to separate large trucks. I wonder what that is.
I think it's the technical name for one of those big arrow things.
Well, yeah, it's a no-drive place, but.
Yeah, it's sort of a little echelon
it's
place to
painted on the
force.
street, yeah.
So a gore is the proper word for that?
I believe so. I've heard it before.
That is a
That's the
proper
term,
use of the
that's-
word gore.
That is the term he used. I actually remember specifically listening to him say that.
What I understood.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but nobody understands that, to me. I mean, I don't understand it.
I
so,
understood it.
You understood what a painted gore
It
was?
says right
Yeah.
afterwards, additional striping around the inner circle of the
So there
roundabout.
should be a note that says, please see Nelson if you don't understand this.
You could do that.
Or we could just say that it's painted lines around the inner circle of the roundabout?
It's more a shape to deflect.
Yes, yeah.
To separate large trucks.
Yeah, it was
Comma.
to keep the trucks.
So it doesn't
so they
crash
would
over
swing
the.
out, so that with their trailer, they drag
So that when they
behind
go
them.
round the corner, they need to. They realise they have enough space so the trailer doesn't cut the corner and damage things.
See, it's exactly right, yeah. He's the expert on.
No, I'm not the expert.
So I just don't understand how paint is separating large trucks.
That's
the
the
whole,
sec-
the whole phrase makes no sense to me. I mean, you could explain gore all day long, and that still doesn't explain how you separate a large truck.
You paint it to
I mean,
indicate
separate it would
there's
be like
enough
taking it into
space
two
to allow the
pieces or-
truck to come round the corner.
No, that's
Okay, I
different.
understand that explanation, but that didn't separate
That
anything.
isn't separating a truck.
Well, all right,
I
I
mean,
take your point.
I could see separating two trucks from each other, or separating the tractor from the trailer, but
I take your point.
Would this make more sense if it read a painted
give up
gore
too
to
easy.
direct large trucks?
Yes, I think that you're right. It would be better.
Would
I
that
go
work?
with that. It just,
Done.
Done. Any
Assuming
other?
that the motion maker and amend. and
No,
second-
I'd be happy to admit anything to make
Anything to
Koenig,
make this
Councillor Koenig happy.
Nelson, you okay with that change?
Yes, I'm
Thank you.
okay with the suggested rewording.
we never go to that much trouble
I
with minutes.
No, we don't. Any other comments or suggestions on the minutes?
Accept them as modified.
If there's none, all in favor of approving them as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 400 for that. That brings us to
Mr.
consideration
Chairman, I
of-
make a motion that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
You had me worried there.
What?
You had me worried that you weren't going to second it.
I was sleeping.
Like, what's the
You were
controversy
waiting
over
to
that one? All right, motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're out. 400. We're adjourned. Don't forget to turn your microphone.